because one I've got a stick, which is obviously normal in France, and I'm in England, we're just like, I'm sorry, what?
Yes, and for horses it's exactly the same. French horses.
So do you have a
It's
year?
not. It's different. Yes, it's different. I know for German horses. I don't know for UK or Irish
I know that
horses.
there's like, I don't know, it's called a pedigree society.
Yeah,
There's something
yeah,
very particular about it.
yeah,
Like you can't call your pedigree
yeah.
dog after the same name. It
Yes,
has to be
exactly.
different, of course.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. No,
okay,
but
so
for example,
do
my
you do athletics?
exactly.
Do you have a yearly?
No, for I don't know. No, 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 no. I think it ends at two. I think it's two. No,
Okay.
you.
So then I know.
For horses, the E ends with a V,
Okay. So
and
then I
then
know
coming B to
horses
A,
equals
and
dog equals
yeah,
not nice.
it's not. No, no.
Okay.
Sorry for that, but no, no, and that's why we know exactly the age,
Yeah.
how old the
As
horses
long as
are, because
horses
we
have
know.
lived for more than 4 years, but I suppose then
Yeah,
you compete. Then
yeah,
you're a really good dog.
exactly. So that's why we know that some horses with a U or V
Yeah.
has, let's say, 14 years old
Yeah.
or 15 years old, and the same with cats and dogs. So
What can you have an cat?
yeah,
You
also,
have to call
yeah,
something beginning with this letter.
yes.
Yes.
Oui, tu sais, vous savez que ça n'existe pas.
Et pour les chevaux aussi.
Ah oui, 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 oui. C'est comme ça, d'ailleurs, c'est comme ça que tu sais, en fait,
Pour les
alors c'est pour les
cochons
Français,
d'Inde.
c'est les cochons.
Non, non, non.
Non, mais c'est correct, c'est pour les chevaux français. Les chevaux français, Mais après, les Allemands, c'est encore un autre système. Les chevaux belges, ils ont le même système que les Français, mais ils sont décalés dans
Et ceux
l'alphabet.
qui courent le TLC, genre
Ah oui, bien
des
sûr.
noms magnifiques, il faut regarder leur première lettre.
Voilà, tout à
Ça
fait.
peut être difficile pour les chevaux allemands.
Sauf
Ils
si
traversent la
ça
frontière.
dépend si s'ils sont immatriculés à l'étranger. Tu vois, si c'est. Voilà. Mais les Français, c'est clair que, voilà, c'est ce que je disais. Moi, mes chevaux, tu vois, j'en ai, ils s'appellent Céliana, S, je sais que c'est les 16 ans. Voilà, l'été, ils ont 15. Les chevaux.
Ils
Non,
font pas de course.
non, non.
Tu as combien de chevaux?
3.
Dont
J'en ai deux qui sont à peu près à 50 les chiens, tout à fait. Ils sont tout en muscles, ils sont très, voilà, ils ont besoin d'exercice. C'est ça. Et c'est vrai que c'est des chasseurs, c'est des terriers. Alors moi, l'autre, il chasse le chat. C'est ça. Et c'est pas great quand il vient avec le chat dans la gueule en disant je vais vous tuer. Si, si. Mais c'est fort. Bah, oui, le chat est intelligent, le chat fait le bruit. Parce que, tu sais, ils ont les Jack Russell, ils ont des dents.
Since it was planned that I should chair after, what is the plan? Everything will be postponed by some time.
Yes. You shall.
Islamophobia.
Islamophobia.
Yeah, it was planned
Is that
before the
okay?
campaign.
I think if the presidency
Yeah, the joint
secretary general
committee is
is
still
still
going.
going,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So they will arrive with a person from the party, and I think the secretary general includes the
Yes, I'm
if the
here
president needs to go for some
2:45.
reason,
Yeah, I'm here.
that's
Okay,
fantastic.
that's great.
Okay, thank you.
Dans le dossier, mais si elle le lit comme ça, c'est un peu... In the joint committee. Yeah. I hope your meeting was going well.
No, it's great.
Blame Sergey. We always blame Sergey.
It's your fault.
Yeah, of course, je vais faire. Vous êtes le professionnel. Ah, vous êtes gentil, merci. Je vous en prie. Thank you. What I do this and the other, the rest of the big thing is some other
Tu fais les amendements?
let's say thanks to everybody.
Vous faites les amendements.
So there is no special meeting. We are programming.
J'aimerais faire... Je vais pas faire... Et on a jeudi d'ailleurs.
This speech on my life.
Rappel au règlement. Oui, c'est rappel au règlement.
Rappel au règlement.
Et c'est pas vraiment un rappel au règlement. Nous avons pris votre décision.
Mais faisons-le tout de suite en attendant la You can start.
The sitting is open.
We have a point of order.
Oui, merci Monsieur le Président. C'est pour un rappel au règlement sur la proposition de résolution de Monsieur Georges Papandréou. J'ai souhaité voter, mais visiblement mon vote n'a pas été pris en compte et je voulais signaler au service de la séance que je votais pour cette résolution.
Thank you very much. That does not change the vote, but it will be registered in our minutes. And to start here as a new member is not the easiest thing, so you will have years to practice this. Thank you very much for mentioning it. Now on the order of business is questions to our Secretary General, Marija Pejcinovic Buric. She is going to answer the questions of you colleagues, and we start with the questions from the political groups. I remind everybody that questions should be limited to 30 seconds. Colleagues should ask questions, not make statements. And we start with Frank Schwabe from the group, on behalf of the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Frank, are you there? He is not yet there. There he is.
On the right side, not expected, but...
You have the floor, Frank.
Dear President, dear Secretary General, we are discussing the preparation of the fourth summit. We have the joint committee with the distinguished ambassadors a few minutes ago. I would like to ask you if you should say today what are should be the outcome, and if you could have two wishes for the outcome of this summit, what would be these two wishes? What do you think is the role of the EU playing in this kind of preparation? What we expect from them? And the second question is about Kavala, like in general, how is the situation due to the case of Mr.
Madam
Kavala?
Secretary General.
Thank you for a few questions. And let me start with the summit. Indeed, we just come from the meeting, joint committee, which was, I think, very useful one for two statutory bodies to exchange the views on the summit. Let me just remind that we are advanced in reflection, including the work of the report of the high-level reflection group that I was tasked to set, and that reported and gave several pieces that can be taken for preparing the summit and for deliverables of the summit. But of course, it's for the Committee of Ministers and our member states to decide to have a summit by unanimous vote. Now, on the outcomes, it would be difficult because the menu is large, and from what we just have heard, there are different ideas. All depends when the summit will take place. You know, in previous times before, a year ago, when I was asked for the summit, my main wish as a deliverable for the summit was that there would be EU accession to the ECHR. European Convention on Human Rights. Now the negotiations in the format 46+1 are taking place. It is, of course, depending on the will of the parties. We are not, we have advanced, but still there is time to go to have that. But if that would be, I think that would be very visible, clear, and one of the decisions that actually would follow some of the previous summits' wishes to have a coherent European human rights architecture, including accession of the European Union to the convention. Another piece that we can take from the report of the high-level reflection group is actually how would in the future be our relations with the European Union. Indeed, you are right. In view of the huge geopolitical changes that are happening after the aggression of Russian Federation on Ukraine, after this body has excluded Russia as a member state, and in the meantime, many other things happen. So we really are facing a lot of challenges, and I think we should rethink our strategic relationship with the EU. It was the memorandum from 2007 was actually one of the products of one of the third summit, which was worked through. And if we are to follow the thinking of the high-level reflection group, we should level up our relations with EU, and I share that view. I think we already have a very strategic relationship. In many terms, we worked together on a number of issues, and I think there is room for more strategic engagement with the European Union. Now, when it comes to Kavala case, what we are witnessing actually on the 11th of July, the court, European Court for Human Rights, was asked and has delivered its ruling that what they think their final word is that in the case of Kavala versus Turkey, Turkey didn't abide by the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, so the court has done its what they were asked for. They make a judgment. Now the execution comes back to the Committee of Ministers, which by the Convention under the Article 46 is the prerogative of the Committee of Ministers. It already, since this judgment, there was the meeting in the format of human rights, where one of the decisions was to task the Committee of Ministers to engage with Turkey. And from what I know is that the current chair, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Defence of Ireland, has already talked to Minister Çavuşoğlu while he was in September in New York. So to step up communication with Turkey with regard to implementing. And from my part, I can only say that the judgments of the courts this is not a negotiation. Judgments of the whole court have to be executed. So in that respect, I can only call that Mr. Kavala should be freed as per the decision of the court as soon as possible.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. Next question comes from Mr. Luring Naksa from Hungary, and he speaks on behalf of the European People's Party. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Secretary General, the Council of Europe has called for the 4th Summit of Head of State and Government based on the report of the High-Level Reflection Group. We in the EPP think that the Parliamentary Assembly could have a great added value to the summit and to the outcome, such as the thinking about the future role of our institution, the Council of Europe. Madam Secretary General, could you please share with us your opinion about involving more the Parliamentary Assembly to the organizing process and about inviting the Parliamentary Assembly to the summit? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General.
Thank you very much. I think in that respect was very useful, the meeting that we just attended. I think the willingness, not only from, I think, your group, but from more parliamentary side, was to be more included. I think in the concluding remarks, it was clear that the Irish incoming chair assured that for what is according to the division of labor, if I may say, it will be done by the Irish preparation for the summit. But I think, you know, we need, and this gives me opportunity to also underline the fact, we are preparing, we are discussing. The Committee of Ministers has its working group on preparation of the summit. Assembly has the special rapporteur who will also have Parliamentary Assembly view on what should be the themes of the summit and whether summit should be held and a number of other issues. So I think parliamentary side is already doing quite a lot, and from what I've seen from the draft report, it's very inclusive. It goes, which is understandable and I think desirable, it goes further than what is in the high-level reflection group, because the idea is to have all the ideas on the table. So I think Parliamentary Assembly is already, in my view, at this stage, more included than the case was before, and, but it remains the decision of the Committee of Ministers to first to have a decision to call the summit and then to decide how to organize the summit. But if you ask me, I think some pleaded also for young people, youth to be included. I think in the times that we live in, it's more inclusive summit would certainly be better reflecting the needs and the views of all Europeans.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. Next question comes from Mr. Bana Paul Zygmunt from Hungary, and he speaks on behalf of the European Conservatives. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear Madam Secretary General, in these hard times, we see the emerge of a new format in Europe, the European Political Community, which basically comprises the states forming the Council of Europe. We may say that in the field of human rights, democracy and the rule of law, a pan-European community already exists. It is the Council of Europe. In this context, Madam Secretary General, I would like to ask you, what is your vision about the future of the Council of Europe? What steps should be done from the part of the Council of Europe in order not to find ourselves in the shadow of the new European initiative? Is it a rival or a partner? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General.
Thank you very much. We also tackled quite extensively EPC, I think, at this meeting that we just attended. EPC is a new initiative. It held its first summit only last week. And for the moment, we cannot say from the themes that were discussed at the first EPC summit and from the communication that was given after the summit, I think it is clear that, and I agree with your statement, that the political community in what regards European political community, in what regards human rights, rule of law and democracy is the Council of Europe. However, as the High Reflection Group proposed, there should be a closer coordination with the EPC, but closer coordination with other similar organizations, something that the coordination we have very regularly with EU, with OSCE, with UN, in order to exchange where we are, to see where we can do things in synergy, and certainly not to overlap. So this, I think, is a good approach also with EPC. It is now launched. And indeed, our 43 out of 46 member states at the highest level were present there. And I really am happy to see that our leaders gathered in front to show unity in front of the horrible aggression of Russian Federation on Ukraine. So on that point, I think that was good to see all the leaders of almost all of our member states staying together and giving this firm message. However, I would also like to see 46 of our high-level leaders at the next summit of the Council of Europe. And I think what we need to decide together, and I think their Parliamentary Assembly, Committee of Ministers, certainly our leaders, ministers, but also heads of states and government, should recommit to what the values of the Council of Europe are. Because in my last two reports, you can very clearly see that there is a backsliding. There was a backsliding in democracy and rule of law in some of our member states. And I think if we go back, why the Council of Europe was created was first as a peace project, but peace be established on the basis of legal instruments that we developed over since 73 years. So I think we need to see whether all what was meant and what is in our statute and in other documents, whether all of our 223 legal instruments, including conventions, are really what is up to what we need now. How should we go in the future? Certainly we are already on the way to develop more in the new areas like environment and artificial intelligence. So I think we are clearly on the route, and in that respect, Parliamentary Assembly was very active last years for the environment. I think the whole, across the board, all the bodies, the Committee of Ministers, several presidencies, Parliamentary Assembly with a number of reports and resolutions and recommendations, court. We had last year the World Forum for Democracy dedicated to environment. Our youth bodies started to discuss. So I think there is certainly need to do more in new areas which in connection to human rights and environment, human rights and artificial intelligence. So my vision of the Council of Europe is to strengthen our position and see together with our leaders what would be the most important strategic orientations for the organization in the times to come. And I think that it would be difficult. 2 years ago, we were discussing, and the Parliamentary Assembly also had its reflection on that part, on the strategic priorities of the Council of Europe. If you look at it now, even after all these very big changes on geopolitical scene that are there, it would be difficult to drop out any of them. So I believe we need to recommit to actually implement our standards, and this is sometimes not easy, but this is the only way how we can move forward and how we can recommit to peace, which we need in Ukraine, but which we need all around Europe. And as someone said it, without peace, there is no prosperity. Without peace, there is no possibility for people living a normal and decent life. So I think the values that are enshrined in our conventions and legal instruments are really there to protect human rights, democracy, and the rule of law of every citizen across our 46 member states.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. Next question comes from Madam Marija Jufreva-Skuratovsky from Estonia, and she speaks on behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. Honored Secretary General. Ukrainian Parliament Verkhovna Rada has prepared a project of appeal to international and European democratic institutions to create special international tribunal to trial Russia's crime of aggression against Ukraine. Which steps are you going to undertake on the level of Council of Europe in order to contribute to the creation of this special international tribunal? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General.
Thank you very much. This was the issue that was actually, it took quite a part of my visit, which I paid to Kyiv in May, with President Zelensky and with the Foreign Minister Kuleba. And indeed, their proposal and argumentation that such a tribunal doesn't exist, that accountability, including the crime of aggression, would be an important advancement of, if you want, of accountability on international level. So they pleaded for the Council of Europe, as Council of Europe was in the forefront of international organizations to react very promptly on breach of the statutes and values of the Council of Europe by excluding Russian Federation. So on my way back, I immediately asked and tasked the colleagues in the legal services to see what is, because there is no such precedence, and what could be a legal ways to do it in general and for the Council of Europe as well. So the colleagues did a very thorough work, and for me, it's really, this is a very important and serious issue. And while we were discussing it, also the discussions were held at different other levels. There was one ministerial conference in The Hague where Council of Europe participated. We were all in Lugano for the Lugano Ukraine Recovery and Resilience Conference, and this issue indeed was raised there. And there I also met with the Speaker of the Parliament, Stefanchuk. So what is sure that our Committee of Ministers, because there was the recommendation also of this body to the Committee of Ministers to reflect upon that. So first discussion has been held lately by the Committee of Ministers with a decision to stay committed to work together with the other international actors on this important issue. So this is where we are at this moment. Accountability is absolutely the must, what we should stand for in different areas, because one day the peace will come, justice needs to be made, and any peace, if it wants to be sustainable, cannot be done without a proper accountability, taking all those who are responsible to be held accountable by international or national fora, and then work further on assisting Ukraine to rebuild a strong and resilient society. So I think I'm quite clear we remain committed to the accountability in all its senses of the word. And one of the first actually activities in which we were, apart from deciding at the Council of Europe of the impossibility to keep the member state who aggressed without other member state, was to start working with the Prosecutor General of Ukraine on gathering evidence for gross human rights violations and war crimes, because obviously no regular prosecutors were dealing with that before, fortunately, but unfortunately now they have to do it. I will, at the end of this week, meet again the new Prosecutor General, so I will continue this engagement, and the Council of Europe will be certainly one of those international organizations that will be helping Ukraine to get all those who should be accountable by assisting Ukraine in any way we can.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. Next question comes from Mr. André Hunko from Germany. He speaks on behalf of the Unified European Left. André?
Frau Generalsekretärin, meine Frage geht auch zu dem 4. Gipfel, weil ich wirklich möchte, dass dieser 4. Gipfel ein großer Erfolg und ein großer Schritt nach vorne wird. Und im Verhältnis zur europäischen politischen Gemeinschaft, die ja ziemlich genau das Gleiche ist wie der Europarat von den Mitgliedstaaten, allerdings ohne Konventionen und ohne parlamentarische Dimension. Ist es richtig, Frau Buric, dass Sie nicht eingeladen waren in Prag? Und wie kann es verhindert werden, dass der 2. Gipfel in Moldawien kurz vor Reykjavik in den Schatten stellt?
Danke sehr. Madam Secretary General.
Thank you for coming back to EPC. There was one part which I didn't respond to before. So those who were invited were at the summit. So there were 43 member states, unfortunately, not all of our member states. And the EU are President of the European Council and President of the Commission. But that doesn't mean that we should not remain in contact with the EPC, as I mentioned earlier. I think coordination is always needed where there are different international fora which may be of interest for cooperation, and clearly there is one. In what concerns, and I think you rightly pointed out to the fact that it may coincide at the 2 summits, because the next summit and the summit is for the moment, the substance of EPC. It, of course, may evolve into more, but for the time being. So next summit is decided and set. We are still to decide first whether to have it and then when. And in order to prepare that and not to have clash in timing, that we would be too close to one another, or in another way to make problems together for our possible summit of 46. I will be in contact with the future organizer of the summit of EPC, who is the Republic of Moldova, the President Maia Sandu. She will be in a month's time here in Strasbourg for our democracy forum. So I will exchange with her to see how we go about this. And at the end of November, I will be with the Parliamentary Assembly Bureau in Reykjavik. I will be at that occasion meeting Prime Minister of Iceland. So I will also At that time, Iceland will be the chair of the Committee of Ministers, so I will also raise this issue with her. But be assured that I already started to talk to our high-level leaders. Yesterday, he was the president of the Swiss Confederation, today president of the Ireland. So I spoke with both of them on this issue, and I will continue to do so in the time to come, because I think it's very important to have a summit, to have well-prepared summit with good results, but also not to make it impossible for the leaders to come at EPC summit and our summit. But as for the moment, we don't know yet when the meeting, if it will be held, and when it will be held, it would be difficult to say what to do. But certainly, we need to think about this.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. We still have 5 minutes left, so I would ask two more questions. I will ask them that you deal with them together. The first question comes from Mr. Ruben Rubinian from Armenia. Ruben, your question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Secretary General, you know very well the consequences of the recent Azerbaijani aggression against Armenia, which happened this September. There are effective tools and mechanisms enshrined by the Convention and the Statute to require the Member States to fully abide by their commitments and obligations. What prevents this organization to undertake targeted and effective steps to constrain aggressive behavior of Azerbaijan that results in grave human rights violations and sufferings of those who are under protection of the European Convention on Human Rights? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. And now the next question comes from Alexander Meresko from Ukraine.
Something be done? Can something be done by our organization to defend the rights of the Uyghurs and to put an end to the genocide in Xinjiang? Thank you.
Madam Secretary General.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For the issue of Armenia, Azerbaijan, you know I made some statements at different stages of the conflicts and escalation that happened. But also other bodies of the Council of Europe have reacted on different level at different situations, including the court with the interim measures asking for prisoners of war to be exchanged. Also, Commissioner of Human Rights has clearly made some recommendations for what is, from her point of view, gross human rights violations. So I can only subscribe to what Commissioner of Human Rights asked in this respect. I think the humanitarian gestures should be very welcome for all prisoners, and I welcome that recently there were some exchanges of prisoners that happened. And also I would welcome and I will encourage high-level meetings. I think there were quite a few recently that were held. And this is actually what we ask always of our member states who join at the time when they were joining, were committing to resolve the issues that they have in a peaceful way. Now, for some of the information that recently came to my knowledge, reports of human rights violations, including allegations of ill treatment and extrajudicial killings, are certainly a source of great concern and must be investigated by competent authorities as required by the European Convention on Human Rights, and so that perpetrators can be brought to justice. Because of the video footage that was brought to my attention, I asked the Azerbaijani side to provide information on how they are going to go about these alleged infringements of the gross human rights violations happening recently. And if I would not get the answer to that, I think there would be another way to address this issue. But at this moment, I really look forward to have answers from Azerbaijani side for these alleged gross human rights violations. For the Uyghurs, as you may know, it is outside of our remit. We cover 46 European states. We have within our remit the rights of minorities, which I think we know very well, and the Framework Convention on National Minorities. Unfortunately, not all of our conventions, and many are not open for those countries who are outside. So if the countries are not parties to the conventions that we have and standards that we have, from the Council of Europe side, it's impossible to have a meaningful impact on that. So unfortunately, when it comes to Uyghurs, is outside of the territory of 46 member states.
Madam Secretary General, please allow me one more question to have the beginning of a gender balance in questions, and also because the next question then comes from our dear colleague Zita Gurmai from Hungary. Zita.
Thank you very much. First of all, as a woman president, I just would like to make sure that you are doing the utmost what we did with the Equality Committee, just to make sure that you are making a strong voice to make sure that these Iranian women are safe and secured, and we cannot allow any other women to be there. That's first. Second, as Hungarian, of course, I really would like to make sure that for Hungary, providing credible support for the Euro-Atlantic integration of the Western Balkans along a clear European perspective is a strategic priority. Your Excellency, where do you see the added value of the Council of Europe in this process? And thank you very much for being with us. And then this is the Breast Cancer Day, and thanks for Pace Women to organize this excellent event. And thanks for all who attended.
Thank you, Zita. Madam Secretary General, this was the last question.
Yes, thank you very much. Concerning the horrible things that are happening and happened recently in Japan, in Iran, it's really appalling, and one cannot but say, and I think that Istanbul Convention is one of those that goes against violence against women and girls and domestic violence. And indeed, again, we are 46 and Iran is not part of that. But some of our conventions are golden standard in its field, and this is the one. And secondly, this is one of those that aims to reach outside of our remit. And I can say that there are 4 countries, Tunisia, Israel recently, and Morocco, I think Mexico as well, who have asked for becoming members. So that's encouraging. One should see whether that would materialize, but that shows that is important. And another thing, in my recent visit to New York, to United Nations General Assembly, I met, among others, the new director for UN Women. And actually, one of the major topic that we exchanged was on Istanbul Convention. Of course, they praised it because the UN doesn't have such a document yet, and we agreed that together we will do more, whatever UN also can from its side to do that. So I think partially, although we cannot directly influence in Iran, hopefully that UN Women could do something. And as you would recall, this morning we were together in this powerful message of support from Parliamentary Assembly, but from the Council of Europe as well. I was there to protest against these horrible human rights violations, human rights in this respect, women's rights. In what concerns your second question for Western Balkan countries, I know that you discussed this issue. I was not present here because I had some other commitments, including the Irish president. But be assured, in all of Western Balkans countries that that are on the way to European integration, we have offices. We are already engaged there. We help them because a number of our standards including the Istanbul Convention, are those that are standards required by their accession or their negotiations for the Council of Europe, for the European Union. So in that respect, we will do all what we can and step up if it is needed. That is why I think our more strategic and more cooperation should be invested from both sides, from European Union in particular. And I think that the summit and decision on stepping up this strategic partnership with European Union will be helpful.
Madam Secretary General, may I thank you wholeheartedly for answering the questions of our colleagues on so many different issues. You are always with us, so thank you very much for participating in our assembly. And next time you are again back on our agendas every part session. Thank you very much. The next item of business this afternoon is a debate on the report titled Raising Awareness and Countering Islamophobia or Anti-Muslim Racism in Europe. You find it in your document 15616, presented by Mr. Mamadou Malcolm Jallow on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. In order to allow time for the second debate this afternoon, I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 7:20 p.m. to allow time for the reply and the vote on the draft resolution. Before we start, I would like to congratulate Mamadou with his birthday today, if I'm well informed. Is it your birthday? Happy birthday, Mamadou. That is the good part of the news. The other part of the news is that this will be probably the last report that will be presented by our dear colleague Mamadou, because he is becoming something really important at home after the Swedish election. And I learned that also the chair of the committee has intentions to leave us and to go back to Sweden. So we will investigate, Madam Secretary General, whether we could do something against the great country of Sweden, because it's taken away all our good colleagues. But for the time being, thank you both. Thank you very much. Happy birthday, Mamadou. And now I give you the floor for your presentation. You have 7 minutes and 5 minutes for your reply at the end of the debate. You have the floor, Mamadou.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for your kind words. And as you mentioned, this might be my last session here, so I'm going to miss all the colleagues here. Before I start, let me just take the opportunity to thank the Secretariat, because I might forget, because I have a lot in my heart and we're running out of time, for an amazing support and assistance they've shown me throughout this process of writing this report. And Mr. Giorgio Lodo has been really patient and professional in this process, so I want to take this opportunity to thank them. Dear colleagues, it is time to talk about Islamophobia. Too many decision makers and a large part of the public are not aware of what Islamophobia is, how widespread it is, and how severely it affects the basic rights and dignity of millions of Muslims in Europe. I say millions of Muslims, but it affects not only Muslims, but also many others who are perceived as Muslims. Mr. President, as a particular and specific form of racism, it is important to have an understanding as to what it is we are talking about in my report. And that is simply why I decided to suggest and support a definition of Islamophobia that was adopted in the United Kingdom by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims. This definition makes a clear reference to the racist nature and the deep racist roots of Islamophobia. That is also why the title of this report includes as an alternative option the term anti-Muslim racism. As the draft resolution indicates, the two terms are used interchangeably in the text. I see this report and resolution as a part of a trilogy of assembly texts that aim to counter different forms of racism and discrimination. Afrophobia, or anti-black racism, a resolution that I wrote that was adopted last year. Anti-Semitism, earlier this year, based on the report of our colleague Petra Bayer, and now Islamophobia. It is important to address all forms of discrimination and intolerance, as they are all deeply harmful to our European society, and they are closely interconnected. The most shameful Islamophobes are in most cases also virulent anti-Semites and racist in any other sense. Moreover, they try to sow division between the groups they target, playing one against the other, and the general population against them all. Mr. President, they run their electoral campaigns this way, and sadly, they win more and more seats in our parliaments. Mr. President, we need to remain vigilant with a European political landscape that is increasingly inconsistent with the values of human rights, democracy, equality, and non-discrimination. Mr. President, this is what we stand for, and we should do everything possible to make sure that Islamophobia is eradicated in Europe, because it is not in line with our principles. I carried out 2 fact-finding visits, respectively to France and the United Kingdom, 2 countries that feature large Muslim communities. The situation of my own country, Sweden, is presented through the findings of the hearing we held in Stockholm in May this year. During the fact-finding visit, I met with a variety of civil society organizations, individual experts, mainly from the academia, journalists, lawyers, and of course with representatives of the public authorities, mostly fellow parliamentarians. The situation they described was worrying. We have a reason to be deeply concerned. The impression is that life is not getting easier for Muslims in Europe. On the contrary, they face increasing obstacles in their quest for an accomplished and dignified life in their own countries. Listening to representatives of the authorities, I got the impression, once again, that there was a lack of empathy and understanding, and in some cases, a lack of information about the challenges that Muslims face in our societies. Sometimes there was even a hint of victim blaming and gaslighting. Mr. President, some would even go to the extreme by questioning and even denying the existence of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. I was asked, are Muslim women really discriminated against? Are they not simply complaining too much? I received an extensive submission from Amnesty International which presents cases of discrimination against Muslims across Europe and relevant recommendations. Many examples mentioned in the report concerning countries such as Austria, Germany, and the Netherlands were taken from this submission. An important source of inspiration for the recommended measures was the revised General Policy Recommendation number 5 on preventing and combating anti-Muslim racism and discrimination by ECRI. I paid particular attention to 2 aspects of Islamophobia in Europe. The gender aspect. Muslim women are disproportionately affected by Islamophobia, both because they are often more easily recognizable, visible, as being part of this group, and they are targeted by policies such as clothing restrictions. The other issue that I dealt with was the impact of anti-terrorism legislation and policies on Muslim people. It appears that anti-radicalization and anti-terror measures often have the unintended effect of stigmatizing Muslims, or those perceived as such, thus contributing to their discrimination and exclusion. The draft resolution that I am presenting and asking you to vote in is soundly anchored to previous text adopted by our Assembly, and it is reiterated the principles laid out in them. Some of them are the importance of adopting an intersectional approach in countering racism, intolerance, and all forms of discrimination. As Audre Lorde said, if you allow me, there is no thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single-issue lives, end of quote. Gender is a crucial element when it comes to Islamophobia, but it quite often intersects with other grounds of discrimination that must also be taken into account. Migration origin, social origin, class, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity, for example. Their intersection produces unique challenges for the people who face them. In this report, just as the Assembly has done many times before, I emphasize that the principle upon which the fight against racism or terrorism, the principle upon which the fight against terrorism are rooted on, must be conducted ensuring respect for human rights, the rule of law, and the common values upheld by the Council of Europe. The support for civil society organizations, acknowledging the important role that they play in countering racism and intolerance, the need to increase diversity and to strive for fair representation of all groups in elected bodies and other institutions. Like I said, these principles are clearly expressed in texts adopted by the Assembly. Politicians, lastly, Mr. President, have an important role to play in preventing and combating Islamophobia. They should be the first to avoid stereotyping and stigmatizing of Muslims. Too often, political leaders and the other public figures have contributed to spreading the misconception that Muslims and Islam are alien and incompatible with European culture and values. This can only exacerbate stigmatization and exclusion. Mr. President, on the contrary, politicians should speak out against Islamophobia and all other forms of intolerance, because political parties should sign the Charter of European Political Parties for Inclusive and Non-Racist Society, which our Assembly adopted earlier this year. Through the resolution that we are voting today, we, the Parliamentary Assembly, reiterate in clear and no uncertain terms our stance against Islamophobia. We state that we are concerned by the constant increase of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred in Europe, with a dramatic spike in recent years. This is also a call for action. We need to ask Council of Europe member states to consider Islamophobia as a specific form of racism and to mention it explicitly in their anti-racism action plans. We also need to call on them to consider combating Islamophobia as a priority. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. Now I open the debate, and first, la première oratrice est Madame Béatrice Fresco-Rolfo de Monaco. Elle parle au nom du groupe ADLE. Béatrice.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le groupe ALDE, chers collègues, le groupe ALDE remercie Mamadou Malcolm Jallow pour son travail effectué lors de l'élaboration de ce rapport. Monsieur le rapporteur, l'exposé des motifs et la résolution n'ont pas emporté l'adhésion de tous les membres du groupe ALDE et certains y ont opposé une réserve importante. Ils auront l'occasion de s'exprimer tout à l'heure. Néanmoins, la grande majorité, dont je fais partie, soutiendra le projet de résolution. Monsieur le rapporteur, votre exposé des motifs est ce que nous pourrions qualifier d'exposé à charge, et il a relevé plusieurs carences en matière de lutte contre les discriminations multiples que peut rencontrer la communauté musulmane. Je crois que c'est bien ce qu'il fallait faire pour réveiller les consciences des membres de cette belle Assemblée sur un problème qui est malheureusement récurrent. Oui, l'islamophobie existe. Oui, c'est une menace pour nos sociétés. De même, il est néfaste qu'un parallèle préjudiciable soit fait entre la simple pratique religieuse et le radicalisme dont peut découler les exactions les plus graves. En cette journée internationale des filles, il m'est impossible, à titre personnel, de ne pas évoquer la détresse des femmes et des filles en Afghanistan, et vous l'avez vous-même condamné, monsieur le rapporteur, mais aussi cette tristesse qui nous touche lorsque l'on évoque les répressions que subissent actuellement les femmes en Iran. Dans les deux cas, à des degrés divers, c'est une atteinte aux droits humains et à la liberté de ces femmes. Mais ces faits doivent absolument être décorrélés de ce projet de résolution. Celui qui est présenté au vote de ce soir n'est pas un blanc-seing pour les fondamentalistes qui veulent asservir les femmes. Ce projet de résolution n'est pas non plus un blanc-seing pour que les radicaux puissent mettre à mal nos modèles sociétaux. Cette résolution faite dans un esprit constructif est la charpente de ce que nous devons faire pour garantir le respect des droits les plus élémentaires, comme la liberté de conscience et de pensée, afin que nous puissions avoir une population épanouie et lutter contre toute forme de discrimination. Je souhaite en conclusion réaffirmer au nom du groupe ALDE que nous devons apprendre à vivre ensemble de manière apaisée et ainsi empêcher les divisions qui pourraient se faire au sein de nos sociétés. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Madame Fresco-Rolfo. Now I give the floor to Mr. Andreas Anneland on behalf of the European United European Left Group. The floor is yours.
Thank you, President. I would like to compliment the rapporteur for his work and for such a concise and important report. We are now in a building and we are members in an institution dedicated to peace and the struggle for human rights. The Council of Europe was created in the wake of a devastating world war, a world war which racism, anti-Semitism, hatred for minorities was such a strong motivator that our continent was left in ruins. We are all a product of this historic lesson, that hatred for other people and religions will end with death and destruction. Therefore, it is shameful that we still see political movements that try to mobilize on hatred and xenophobia, even though we all know how destructive that can be. Islamophobia, or discrimination against Muslims and those perceived as Muslims, is widespread and increasing in member states. Knowing that fact, it leaves us with a responsibility to act. This report is a call to action. For instance, the conspiracy theories based on fabrications that immigrants, Muslim populations are going to outbreed or replace native populations are widespread in Europe, North America, and beyond. The Great Replacement theory was mentioned explicitly as a motivation of several terrorist attacks globally. This was the view of the far-right extremists who on the 22nd July 2011 killed 77 people in Norway, mostly youths, on a political summer camp for the Labour Party. This was also the view of the gunman who broke into the Al-Noor Mosque in Norway in 2019 with the intention of killing Muslims, inspired of the Christchurch shooting that killed 49 people earlier that year. These are extreme and brutal events. But these ideas are not created in a vacuum. People do not just wake up and suddenly hate, discriminate, or try to kill Muslims. These are the attitudes created by politicians, extreme ideologies, racism, and fear. These attitudes are dangerous and creates a dynamic where Islamophobia is accepted in society. We see it, for example, with the increase of racist hate crime. We are satisfied that the report clearly states that Islamophobia is a problem. When the existence of Islamophobia is denied, the lack of awareness hinders the possibility to adopt relevant anti-discrimination policies. Islamophobia manifests itself in a variety of forms. Islamophobia disproportionately affects Muslim women. They face a challenging situation resulting from multiple and intersectional discrimination. This perspective is important, and we are glad that this is included in the report. Islamophobia is a severe violation of human rights and dignity that do not only affect people who are Muslim or perceived as such, it also creates division in national communities, undermining social cohesion and the peaceful living together that all Council of Europe member states have the ambition to achieve. The resolution was unanimously adopted by the committee, and that sends a strong message. I hope that this assembly will do the same today.
Thank you. And now, on behalf of the Socialists, Mr. Benchika. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Woman, excuse me. Dear Rapporteur, thank you so much for all your work, not only in this report, but in the few years that we have been working together. It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much, Malcolm. Dear colleagues, my name is Furat Benchika. I'm a proud queer Muslim. As a queer person, I have always felt the support of the members of the Assembly in the fight for our rights and equality. As a Muslim, I hope that the members of this Assembly will be equally supportive today. The importance of this report cannot be underestimated. It provides us with a clear definition of Islamophobia, or rather anti-Muslim racism. Such a definition is important to recognize this particular kind of racism, and research proves that this kind of racism is on the rise all over Europe. This is not a coincidence. Far-right and populist politicians benefit from dividing population between proper Europeans and those who don't belong here, and who they are a threat to our security. And it is going on for decades. It has ruined so many childhoods, so many dreams of youngsters, and it keeps on going on, and we need to stop it. While at the same time, it's important that we fight all powers that want to destroy the European way of life. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that the narrative of division and incompatibility is counterproductive and leads to bad policy and make young men turn their back to our institution and society. I greatly appreciate the intersectional approach and especially the attention to female Muslims in this report. Muslims face even more problems related to anti-Muslim racism. They are often the victim of an institutionalized discrimination. European nations insist that they want to emancipate Muslim women, but obstruct their emancipation by banning the headscarf in schools and workplaces. It's about time that we recognize that women are capable of making their own choices and that feminism and emancipation includes all women. This is what true inclusive feminism looks like, or should. Diversity is a strength and a reality of Europe, with strong policy against the faith-based discrimination on the housing market, workplace, law enforcement, and school, etc. Europe can strengthen her efforts for equal opportunity for each and all of us citizens and put a stop to the danger of a rise of anti-Muslim racism. So, the child of this queer Muslim of color can walk on our streets and go to our school without a fear and with a sense of belonging here. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Furat. Now, on behalf of EPP, Mrs. Boriana Aberg.
President, dear colleagues, in this assembly, we all agree that racism is evil. We all agree that discrimination due to ethnicity or religious beliefs should be combated by all necessary means. Unfortunately, Mr. Jallou's report equates even fully legitimate criticism of Islam with Islamophobia. He employs well-known left-wing rhetoric by describing society in terms of the oppressed and the oppressors. In this report, Muslims are oppressed and the Western society, the oppressor. And justice is achieved when society adapts itself to a loud and demanding minority that hardly represents all Muslims. But in contrast to the traditional left wing, Mr. Jallow has abandoned secular ideals. It is extremely concerning that when the Quran riots in Sweden are mentioned in the report, there is no condemnation of the reckless violence against the police. Rather, he questions the freedom of expression that, according to him, should not include any offense of Islam. Mr. Jallow finds a worrying development over the last few years due to the closure of Muslim organizations in France. But he seems not to be worried about the Islamist organizations that propagate oppression of women, anti-Semitism, and LGBT hate. Is it worth remembering all the European Islamists who traveled to join Islamic State to rape, torture, and burn caged people? Where were these Islamists radicalized? Mr. Jallow mentioned the headscarf ban in French schools, but doesn't not bring up the fact that the ban had the support of many French Muslims. The organization Ni Pute Ni Soumise, started by women, young women of North African region, also took a stand against the headscarf due to its oppressive symbolism. I agree that there is prejudice against Muslims in Europe, and this prejudice must be fought. But establishing a culture that teaches people that if they assume the victim role and become offended, the rest of the society may divert from their principles is the wrong path. The freedom of expression and the equality between men and women are not negotiable. The values of the Western society are not negotiable. To label the justified critique against Islam as racist and Islamophobic doesn't combat prejudice against Muslims. On the contrary, it adds fuel to the polarization of our society.
Thank you, Boriana. And on behalf of European Conservatives, Mr. Van Pareren, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, the title of the report brings us in confusion. There is no answer in this total report. How does Islamophobia arise? the major point, preventing, is missing. I'm a father of different children, 4 children, and one of them is married with a Muslim. Myself, I'm Jewish, and my grandson is homosexual. So we look from different points to the same issue. But still, the why question is missing. Let us take some typical examples. A white girl passes by a Muslim boy. A Jewish man, like me, with a kippah on his head, I don't have it now, passes by a Muslim boys group. Or a Muslim girl with her Muslim name applies for a job. Or a Muslim boy of 23 drives an expensive Porsche. We all can fill in the comments in each situation. Is that Islamophobia or is this white phobia? In the reports, all words are spent on the downside of Islamophobia. But how comes that Islamophobia? And most of us can that fill in. To be frank, the public relation of Islam is not so supportive to this fact, to prevent it. I just have to mention, and it has already mentioned before, Iran, Afghanistan, and ladies, the brave and heroic ladies, they put off their hijabs just to be free from the oppression they have all day, all years. Closer to our homes, we find mosques where there's big hate in some mosques against the Western society. Also happening in Muslim schools sometimes. And that's not good, because that's not the way how we work and will work as people together. We want to be connected and not enemies. And yes, it is a case that most immigrants have a simple job, as many are unemployed. And their family culture is different to the Western culture. But that shouldn't be a point of concern. Our concern is that we don't work on the real thing, and that is integration. No segregation, but integration. That is needed. Otherwise, we will continue to have these problems. And unfortunately, we realize that left politicians, they try to look away from the real problem, and it's not good. Let's work together to solve this situation from the very beginning, and not at the end with a lot of rules and penalties. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now we've finished the list of the speakers on behalf of political groups. We start the list of other speakers. First on the list is Madame Adam Mara from Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Mesdames, Messieurs. Le thème abordé par notre collègue Monsieur Diallo est délicat. On le sent tout de suite à la lecture de son exposé des motifs et à la lecture de la résolution. Ce thème cristallise à lui seul la guerre des mots et des définitions, stratégie habilement utilisée par celles et ceux qui nient sciemment une réalité pourtant toute simple dans nos sociétés. Si on a la peau noire ou basanée, si on a un nom à consonance arabe ou africaine, si on est de religion musulmane, la vie est simplement plus compliquée dans nos pays européens. Plus compliqué pour trouver un travail, trouver un logement, parfois le respect. Ce n'est pas un sentiment, ce n'est pas une volonté de victimisation, c'est une réalité attestée par de nombreuses études, Madame la représentante de l'APP qu'on a entendu tout à l'heure. D'autant plus si l'appartenance religieuse est visible par un vêtement. La guerre des mots, donc. J'aimerais prendre ici un exemple français, puisqu'il semblerait, on l'a entendu ce matin, qu'une certaine composante politique de ce pays arrivait aux affaires dans cet hémicycle. En France, après la décolonisation, les personnes arrivant du nord de l'Afrique pour y travailler étaient justement nommées des travailleuses et des travailleurs. Puis, dans les années 80, on a commencé à les appeler les Arabes. Et puis, dans les années 2000, on les appelle les musulmans. Or, on voit bien qu'au moment où on essentialise une des appartenances qui fondent notre identité unique, en la dévalorisant, on ouvre la voie au racisme, au sexisme, à l'antisémitisme, à l'islamophobie, et j'en passe. L'autre aspect qui m'a toujours beaucoup étonné, que ce le soit dans mon pays ou ailleurs, c'est de penser pensait que l'islam était encore toujours importé par les étrangers. Les musulmans sont des étrangers pour certains. Et on nie qu'il y a des Suisses, des Français, des Anglais, des Suédois, des Blancs et des Blancs qui sont aussi des religions musulmanes. On nie que ce n'est pas une importation, mais bien une émanation nationale. Mais là aussi, c'est une tactique non plus sémantique, mais politique pour créer des catégories de personnes divisées pour mieux régner. Pour terminer, j'aimerais reprendre les propos de notre collègue Gomez-Reino, tenus ce matin dans l'autre débat, celui sur la perspective européenne pour les Balkans. L'Europe est composée de peuples dont la religion est l'islam. C'est aussi pour cela que la résolution de notre collègue M. Diallo prend tout son sens. Pour les personnes musulmanes venant hors de l'Europe et aussi pour celles et ceux qui sont rattachés à notre continent. Je profite pour saluer bien sûr cette résolution, mais également M. Diallo, notre collègue, dont c'est la dernière partie de session, pour lui redire à quel point son engagement dans ce Conseil m'a toujours impressionné et qu'il va nous manquer, à moi en tout cas.
Merci, Madame. Now, in a debate, I call Madame Katalin Csaba from Hungary.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Chers collègues, la Hongrie est une nation accueillante. Cela est prouvé par le fait que nous, les Hongroises, avons été les premières dans l'histoire à annoncer la loi sur la liberté de conscience et la tolérance religieuse en 1568 à la diète de Torda, en Transylvanie. La reconnaissance légale de l'islam au Parlement hongrois a eu lieu il y a plus de 100 ans, en 1916. Dans notre pays, nous enregistrons 32 communautés religieuses comme églises établies. Parmi elles, 2 communautés islamiques bénéficient également d'un tel statut. En Hongrie, les musulmans ne souffrent pas de discrimination en raison de leur foi. Le gouvernement hongrois apporte également un soutien financier aux 2 églises islamiques. Il fournit non seulement une possibilité légale à la communauté islamique hongroise de maintenir des institutions dans le domaine de l'éducation publique et de l'aide sociale, mais assure également leur financement de la même manière et dans la même mesure que les autres institutions ecclésiastiques. Dans le même temps, il est également vrai que la Hongrie n'est pas une société multiculturelle et nous n'avons pas accepté des migrants de nos colonies car nous n'étions pas un pays colonisateur. Nous n'avons pas un grand nombre d'immigrants musulmans vivant dans notre pays, donc le problème du sentiment anti-musulman, qui est principalement un problème en Europe occidentale, découle de l'intégration des immigrants musulmans, n'est pas un défi pour nous. Nous n'avons pas un grand... Comme dans l'UE, l'islamophobie est considérée par notre pays comme une forme de racisme. C'est pourquoi les organisations ne traitent généralement pas ce sujet séparément, mais enquêtant plutôt sur les actions contre toutes les minorités et les discours de l'Inde dans leur ensemble. Le gouvernement hongrois a déclaré une tolérance zéro envers l'antisémitisme et le racisme qu'il applique strictement. Compte tenu de ce qui précède, nous considérons qu'il est injustifié et ne soutenons pas la mise en évidence d'un texte de l'islamophobie du thème du racisme. Merci.
Köszönöm szépen. Now the floor goes to Mr. Fazil Mustafa from Azerbaijan.
Dear colleagues, Islamophobia is a specific form of racism that must be tackled. Muslims suffer from discrimination, stigmatization, and exclusion in all areas of life, such as employment, education, vocational training, services, and political participation, but also from racist violence and speech. However, research based on proxies has estimated that around 19 million Muslims live in Europe. which represents 6% of the total European population. Consequently, even those who choose not to practice Islam, but who perceive it as Muslim because of their ethnicity, migration, background, or the wearing of other religious symbols, is subjected to discrimination. Muslim women are disproportionately affected by Islamophobia as a result of multiple grounds of discrimination, especially if they wear religious clothing or symbols. They experience multiple discrimination on the basis of gender, religious, ethnicity, social class, migration background. In some countries, laws impose a central prohibition on religious, cultural symbols and dresses, disproportionality impacting women wearing the headscarf. These policies are discriminatory, and such a prohibition negates the right to freedom of inspection of those women who choose to wear religious and cultural symbols and dresses. European Union laws against racism and discrimination already exist, including the Racial Equality Directive and the Framework Decision on Combating Racism and Xenophobia. In conclusion, I think that we must call for national strategies to combat Islamophobia and promote the inclusion of Muslims. The framework will serve as a means to ensure that member states take policy measures to combat Islamophobia and protect the rights of Muslims in Europe. Thanks.
Thank you. Now I call Mr. Ojavili from Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, I am really so sad and disappointed because a few minutes ago there was so racist speech against Islam and against the Muslim people. And unfortunately, some colleagues cheer for this. I just say, shame on you, nothing else. Dear colleagues, I would like to start by thanking for Mr. Yallo for his excellent report emphasizing the importance of the issue of Islamophobia, or more precisely, anti-Muslim racism in Europe. The negative atmosphere against Muslims at present has been worsened by increasing immigration flows during the last years. After the Syrian civil war that started in 2011, millions of people had to leave their country and start to enter European countries, primarily Turkey, through various means. While Turkey is trying to provide human living conditions for all immigrants, especially for those coming from Syria, most European countries have considered Syrians as a national security threat, instead of providing protection to these people and preserving their rights by complying with the obligations imposed by the international law. With the increase in the number of Muslim immigrants, anti-Islamic policies began to become widespread and institutionalized in many European countries, and the discourse of multiculturalism began to be abandoned. It can be said that European politicians and parties, the media and the intelligentsia have created fear, this fear within their society, rather than the alleged anti-Islam and anti-Muslim oppositions in some segments of population. As a matter of fact, the relationship between the migration crisis and Islamophobia became more evident during the refugee crisis that started after the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. The perception of Ukrainian immigrants who wanted to take refugee in Europe stands out as a kind of opposite reflection of the United European Union's perception of Muslim immigrants. Commentators have described Ukrainian refugees as Christians, whites, similar to people living in Poland, Europeans with blonde hair and blue eyes, people who watch Netflix and have Instagram accounts. In brief, people who were not Muslims. The past years has shown us that it is not refugees that scare Europe. It's mostly their religion, race, and color of their skin. Racism is using migration as a cover and denying Muslim migrants the basic human rights to flee conflict and take refuge. We must force ourselves with this reality and work towards countering anti-Muslim racism in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I call Mrs. Lisa Selnes, socialist from Norway.
Madam President, first of all to the rapporteur, thank you for this very important report. The increase of negative attitudes towards Muslims in Europe is frightful. This is now more and more addressed as Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism. Using these words are changing the debate radically. We now acknowledge that Muslims in Europe meet racism. The Council of Europe's core activities are human rights. This includes important freedoms and diversity that our European societies need to embrace. Saying this, I of course also say this: all citizens living in a democracy have the right to be heard in the making of the law, but neither religion or culture can be accepted as an excuse for breaking it. We have experienced attacks by right-wing terrorists in Norway. Everyone knows about Utøya in 2011. In 2019, a young Norwegian man shot his adopted stepsister before continuing to an Al-Noor mosque near Oslo, where he tried to attack people praying. Fortunately, he did not succeed in killing anyone in the mosque. The mosque has now been rebuilt and restored after the shooting and has taken on an additional mission to create a safe place for dialogue and debate where there is room for discussion on freedom of speech, active citizenship, and intercultural understanding. Workshops for youths on democracy and human rights are now being held at both Utøya, which were attacked in 2011, and in the Al-Noor Mosque, which was attacked in 2019. This is a brilliant example on how actions of hate of a right-wing extremist results in more dialogue, more focus on democracy, and more focus on human rights. The growing increase of hate speech and anti-Muslim racism is something that we as an organization and parliamentarians are obliged to address. We must look upon it as a structural challenge and use this report to create politics that embrace diversity and human rights, not hatred and racism. Thank you.
Thank you. I call next Mrs. Margaret de Burgh, socialist from Netherlands.
Thank you. I want to thank Mamadou Diallo for initiating and delivering this important report. As the report states, Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism is often overlooked and underestimated, and as we can hear, even denied. While the existence of anti-Afro-racism and anti-Semitism is widely acknowledged, the discrimination of Muslims or perceived Muslims often is not seen as a form of racism, which in fact it is. And anti-Muslim racism does not just concern discrimination, unequal treatment of those who are different. It often takes the form of Muslim hate, of deliberately offending, accusing, and disqualifying men and women who are seen as Muslims. As the report clearly states, Muslim women who wear a headscarf are particularly vulnerable to Muslim hate. A hate that is not seldomly disguised as support for women who are being oppressed within their religion. We must not let this disguise fool us. Of course, women who are being oppressed in name of any religion deserve our support, but the hate that women wearing a headscarf face has nothing to do with that. In the past week, we could see several examples in which the important cause of giving women the freedom not to wear a headscarf was abused in order to tell women that they are collaborating with the oppressor by wearing a headscarf. Let us make it very clear. What women wear or do not wear should be the decision of women themselves, not of the state, not of the religious leaders, not of the parents or the husbands. And it is most definitely unacceptable that white men on social media harass independent journalists by telling them that they cannot be in solidarity with women in Iran if they wear a headscarf. This was the case in the Netherlands last week. We have to keep our eyes on the ball. We have to fight both sexism and racism, including anti-Muslim racism. And we should stay away from those who pretend to fight the one by doing the other. I'm glad we have a strong ally in Mamadou for this cause. Is it not here, then somewhere else. Thank you, Mamadou.
Thank you. Now I call Mr. Alexander Christiansson from Sweden. The floor is yours.
President, there we go with the microphone. In the short time available to me, I would like to focus firstly on the main word in the title of the report, namely Islamophobia, where phobia, according to the dictionary, stands for fear unfounded. This debate requires two thoughts at the same time, something that seems to be challenging for some people. To claim that someone who criticizes, for instance, a religion, Christianity, Islam, for instance, is a phobe can easily be a ruler technique and a way of reducing a person's opinion. This is not to be tolerated in a healthy democracy. It is bullying and it's manipulating. It's a difference between being an Islamophobe and submitting a religion to careful scrutiny. For example, 2 weeks ago, the French Minister of the Interior decided to immediately close down a mosque located about 20 kilometers from here in the city of Obernai. He did so on the following grounds. Namely, that the local Salafist imam in his sermons over many years had 1. Called for the legislation of polygamy, 2. Advocated discrimination of Jews, homosexuals, and women, 3. Praised terrorist acts, and 4. Encouraged young members of his community to participate in jihad, which several of them also did. Nearly a dozen other Salafist imams are active in this region of France alone. In Sweden, we have the same situation with increasing honor culture and moral police. These kinds of doctrines is the real threat to our society, and all Muslims in our countries must contribute their share. And I am certain that the large majority of all law-abiding moderate Muslims will agree with me on this aim common to us all. The following sentence in paragraph 12 of the draft resolution says, Council of Europe member states are required to ensure respect for the rights of freedom of expression, assembly, and association. Freedom of expression is indeed fundamental for our Western civilization. This is the reason why, for instance, the Danish-Swedish politician Rasmus Paludan was not arrested after burning copies of the Quran at recent manifestations in Sweden. He was protected by the convention, as well as centuries-old legislation in Sweden guaranteeing freedom of expression. What's worrying is the debate that followed, where some influential voices pleaded for limiting free speech in favor of stone-throwing rioters. Rioters that was women and men, older ladies sharing the young boys throwing rocks at the police. Many of us, and myself indeed, may not approve of Mr. Paludan's excessive provocation. I surely don't. But as Voltaire said some 300 years ago to a political adversary, I may not share your opinion, but I would sacrifice my life for your right to express it. So let us not forget those who sacrifice themselves for our right to freedom of opinion and expression. Let us not take the democratic rights for granted. So my recommendation is to vote against this report. Thank you, Madam President.
Now I call Monsieur Jacques Lenay from France.
La présidente, monsieur le rapporteur, mes chers collègues, la liberté de pensée, de conscience et de religion, ainsi que l'interdiction de toute discrimination sont deux aspects essentiels de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme garantie par ses articles 9 et 14. Notre Assemblée, à travers de nombreux rapports, a beaucoup travaillé sur l'enjeu de la lutte contre le racisme sous toutes ses formes, et je m'en félicite. Néanmoins, je ne partage pas aujourd'hui l'orientation du rapport qui nous est proposé, qui sous-tend la proposition de résolution qui nous est soumise. Le rapporteur, notre collègue Mamoudou Malcolm Jallow, a sa conception que je respecte de la lutte contre le racisme et en l'espèce du racisme anti-musulman, qu'il qualifie d'islamophobie. Son approche communautariste le conduit à prôner l'établissement de statistiques ethniques, ce qui est strictement impossible en France au nom d'une conception universaliste inscrite dans notre Constitution. Si je respecte sa conception, je conteste en revanche la manière dont il en vient, au nom de celle-ci, à disqualifier de manière systématique l'approche universaliste française. Je conteste également totalement son analyse sur la situation de certaines mosquées dont le gouvernement français a demandé à juste titre la fermeture car elle menaçait gravement l'ordre public. Il ne s'agissait en rien d'une vague de répression, comme cela est indiqué dans le rapport. Quant à son analyse sur le port de certaines tenues, elle méconnaît fondamentalement le fait que certaines organisations défient clairement la conception française de la laïcité pour imposer leur agenda d'islam politique. La lecture de notre collègue me paraît totalement erronée s'agissant de la situation en France. Quant à ses considérations sur le terrorisme, je veux lui rappeler qu'en France, c'est bien le terrorisme islamiste qui a meurtri notre pays en de nombreux endroits, à de trop nombreuses reprises au cours des dernières années. Je le dis avec d'autant plus de force que sera mis à la fin de cette semaine le prix Samuel Paty du nom de cet enseignant assassiné pour avoir défendu la liberté d'expression. Ces débats, notre rapporteur les a eus avec des collègues sénatrices qui ne partageaient aucunement ses convictions. Cela transparaît dans le rapport, mais je regrette que leur analyse n'ait pas été rapportée de manière totalement fidèle. Tronquer une phrase peut amener à altérer la pensée. Modifier l'ordre des interventions, comme cela a été fait pour sa considération sur le terrorisme, peut altérer la dynamique d'un échange. Comme vous l'avez affirmé, notre collègue Jacqueline Eustache-Brignot, l'islamophobie n'existe pas dans le droit français, au contraire du racisme et de l'antisémitisme. Pour ces différentes raisons, je m'opposerai au texte qui nous est proposé, car il repose sur une analyse fondamentale, erronée et partiale.
Merci. I call next Mr. Ziya Altunaldis from Turkey.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Rapporteur, Mr. Mamadou Diallo, for his arduous efforts in preparing this report, as well as our colleagues today who support this report and stand against the anti-Muslim sentiments in Europe. As elaborated by the reporter, Islamophobia is a new form of racism and xenophobia that stems from unfounded fear, mistrust, and hatred towards Muslims and Islam, and anti-Muslim racism in Europe is a multifaceted issue. Manifesting on interpersonal, public, and cultural levels, Islamophobia is destructive and disruptive for the lives and livelihoods of millions of Muslims in Europe. While anti-Muslim sentiments were already present, they were heightened after the terrorist attacks of the early aughts. In the aftermath of such deplorable events, the perception of Islam became more associated with terrorism, and as a result of other recent economic and political developments, far-right parties became stronger in many European countries, and anti-Muslim discourse has become widespread. The effect of media on the public discourse has been particularly hurtful, shaping people's beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes towards Muslim and Islam. There are many precedents in the traditional media that perpetrated the perception that Islam is a violent and war-prone culture, associating all Muslims and Muslim organizations with terrorism and using the power of media to target Muslims has unfortunately become all too common. As the rapporteur has thoughtfully put forth in his report, the public attitude of alienation and outracism of a part of a country is very damaging to the fabric of Europe. It is vital to firstly identify and accept this problem, then take a multi-layered approach in combating anti-Muslim racism. Common efforts towards a shift in the political and cultural climate of Europe is needed, and there won't be a quick and easy fix and solution, which makes it all the more important for us to start working together as soon as possible, sooner than later. And I thank you all.
Thank you. In a debate, I call now Lord Leslie Griffiths from United Kingdom.
Madam Chair and colleagues, it's a privilege to take part in this debate, and I hear the variety of points of view being expressed as we seek to find our way to a statement that will give all of us a baseline from which to take action in the future. And I endorse the line of action that's recommended and hope sincerely that it will carry the day at the end of this debate. I'm a religious leader in the United Kingdom and have worked extensively with Muslims in a variety of ways. For 20 years, running a school for girls in an inner city borough in London where 85% of the girls wear the hijab and there is no problem whatsoever. A school uniform has been designed that meets the needs both of the girls in question and from other racial and social backgrounds without any tensions at all. I have worked with the Muslim Council of Britain, especially through the Islamic Relief Organization. I do a lot of work in Haiti in the Caribbean, which is in dire straits just now. And Muslims across Britain responded fantastically generously to the terrible earthquake that happened there 10 years ago. And I and a sheikh, a Muslim leader, led a little delegation to Haiti to show solidarity with the victims of that. I've just had an intern work with me who spent his vacations in Calais working with those in the jungle awaiting an opportunity to cross the Channel to the United Kingdom, and frustrated because he spoke French and was able to talk to some of them, didn't speak Arabic and couldn't talk to so many others, and he has now gone to the Middle East and is paying his own way to learn Arabic with the express desire of coming back to be more useful in the refugee work in Calais. In all these ways, I have only formed positive impressions of everything that can be achieved when we find a way of going beyond attitudinizing in order to discover the people on the other side of the attitudes that so often divide us. It is a miracle every time it happens. There's just one word of caution I would address to the perpetrators of this particular effort. I am a Christian theologian. I remember how a creed was intended to solve all the differences in the Mediterranean in the 4th and 5th centuries. I know that once the creed was formed, more people were excluded by the creed than included, and the great irony was that when the Roman Empire collapsed, it was at the hands of migrants who had been excluded by the creed. We must not worship the creed, we must have it. But nothing substitutes for meeting people and integrating with them.
Thank you. Now I call Mr. Thomas Pringle from Ireland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank Mamadou for his report, and I am happy to support it here tonight. As noted within the explanatory memorandum, the concept of the other is utilised and weaponised throughout its political strategy. As we witness the increasing rise of right and far-right politics within Member States, it is vital that we do not fall into a trap of ideological neutrality and ambivalence. Indeed, it would do us well to remember an interview given by Berlusconi in the 1990s, where he boasts of his invention of the centre-right through his allyship with the League and fascists. In doing so, he legitimised their presence and their politics. This political legitimisation is insidious. Working from a top-down approach, we see the likes of the Swiss ban on coverings, to the French laws that claim to uphold secularism, yet clearly serve to vilify the French Muslim community. And it is this disparity between stated aims and actual outcomes where we can see the right-wing motives and acts to legitimise Islamophobia. The ECRI General Policy Recommendation number 5 on preventing and combating anti-Muslim racism and discrimination indicates that Islamophobia includes structural forms of racism. A clear example of this is happening through counter-terrorism laws. As noted within the report, a specific feature of Islamophobia is its connection with counter-terrorism policies. The EU's Agency for Fundamental Rights Directive on Combating Terrorism, Impact of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, confirms that counter-terrorism strategies notably impact the human rights of Muslims within the EU. Tellingly, the Amnesty International Guide on Racial and Religious Discrimination in Counter-Terrorism goes so far as to call upon states to refrain from classifying certain crimes as terrorism when based solely on their presumed political or ideological motives. Instead, rely on the ordinary criminal justice system and, where necessary, on war crimes and international criminal law. In public discourse, terrorism was almost exclusively linked to Islam, yet right-wing violence was rarely described as terrorism. What this indicates is a strategisation at policy and legislative level that both feeds and is ultimately sustained by social willingness to demonise the other. A separate Amnesty International submission to the Council of Europe outlines in clear terms that the narrative associating Muslims with terrorism influences the way in which those with power make decisions. While there may be a growing awareness and acknowledgement in certain levels of the existence of Islamophobia, it is crucial that we remain actively vigilant in the face of it. Make no mistake, the prevalence of Islamophobia within our states is mandated by those who benefit from the rhetoric of the other. It is the age-old method of divide and conquer that we must protect against. Thank you.
Thank you. In a debate now, I call Mr. Bernard Sabella from Palestine. If he's not here, then we will continue. Monsieur Laurent Jacobelli from France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le rapporteur, mes chers collègues. Monsieur le rapporteur, vous faites fausse route. Il fallait, je le pense, et c'était l'urgence, écrire un rapport contre la menace islamiste qui menace nos sociétés et l'Europe entière, plutôt que contre l'islamophobie qui est aujourd'hui, disons-le, un fantasme. En France, les musulmans ont le droit de pratiquer leur religion selon les mêmes règles qui régissent toutes les religions présentes sur le territoire, et c'est tant mieux. La France, de par son refus intrinsèque du communautarisme et du séparatisme, est structurellement anti-discrimination. Si un groupe décide d'adhérer à la communauté nationale, en respectant les règles, en faisant primer notre culture sur sa culture d'origine, en obéissant aux lois de la République et non pas aux lois de sa religion, alors il fait partie intégrante de la communauté nationale, il n'est pas musulman, il n'est pas juif, il n'est pas chrétien, il n'est pas athée, il est tout simplement français. Ne faites pas semblant de ne pas comprendre notre modèle laïque. Les discours culpabilisants, poussés par des lobbies islamistes, soutenus par des politiques d'extrême gauche, souvent lâches, n'auront aucun effet sur nous. Les faits sont là. Il y a, en 2021, 171 actes délictueux contre des musulmans. C'est 171 de trop. Mais disons-le, il y avait dans le même temps 523 actes antisémites et 686 actes antichrétiens. En faisant de l'islamophobie une grande cause européenne, vous faites le jeu de ceux qui veulent instrumentaliser cette peur. Vous faites le jeu des islamistes et des frères musulmans. Vous essayez de convaincre les musulmans installés en Europe que les efforts nécessaires qu'ils ont faits pour s'intégrer, pour la grande majorité d'entre eux, sont en réalité le fruit d'une oppression. Nos règles, nos lois, nos valeurs, tout serait fait pour persécuter l'islam. Alors à quoi bon les respecter? Vous avez les mêmes arguments que les frères musulmans ou certaines filières islamistes et djihadistes en France. C'est à cause de ce type de rapport que des musulmans en détresse sociale se laissent convaincre par les recruteurs de l'islam radical. C'est à cause de ce type de rapport que la rhétorique des plus extrêmes prend racine dans nos banlieues. J'en parle avec beaucoup de gravité, car la France, dont j'ai l'honneur d'être un représentant, a souffert dans sa chair du terrorisme de l'islam radical. Les centaines de Français abattus au Bataclan, écrasés sur la promenade des Anglais, en sont malheureusement témoins. Voilà le véritable danger qui guette les peuples européens, toutes confessions confondues, l'intégrisme. Alors, mes chers collègues, défendons les valeurs démocratiques et républicaines, défendons la laïcité, refusons la dictature des minorités, votez contre ce rapport, c'est salutaire. Merci.
Merci. Now I call Monsieur Simon Mutka from Belgium. The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors, chers collègues, je tiens d'abord chaleureusement à remercier Monsieur Jalot pour son excellent rapport qui met le doigt sur une réalité trop souvent niée dans notre société, à savoir celle des discriminations que vivent les citoyens musulmans. Depuis des décennies et sous l'influence de George Bush, le monde a été coupé en deux. Une part d'abord un prétendu axe du bien, ceux des Occidentaux, et un prétendu axe du mal, à savoir les musulmans. C'est bien cette lecture du choc des civilisations qui imprègne les pensées racistes et islamophobes de nos pays. C'est bien pour cette raison que nous oublions que 82% des victimes du terrorisme islamiste sont en fait des musulmans à travers le monde. C'est aussi pour cette raison que nous oublions que chez nous, la majorité des actes terroristes sont des faits de groupes d'extrême droite, racistes, homophobes et masculinistes. Alors je vais me concentrer sur cet aspect, celui du terrorisme. Bien entendu, nos États doivent se protéger des actes de terrorisme en tout genre, y compris le terrorisme islamiste, mais regardons un instant ce que cette lutte contre le terrorisme coûte à ces populations musulmanes. Une récente étude de la prestigieuse université belge, la KUL, intitulée « Les effets secondaires de la lutte contre la radicalisation sur les musulmans belges », a pointé une réalité qui veut que ceux qui subissent finalement les différents fichages sécuritaires subissent une réalité de conséquences. La première conséquence, elles sont d'abord matérielles. Suite notamment à des surveillances policières, à des descentes de police nocturnes, à des fermetures de comptes en banque, à des fichages interdisant des emplois ou encore à des interdictions de travail, il y a toute une série de conséquences financières qui se portent sur ces populations, à savoir notamment perte de revenus, restriction de déplacement, mais aussi des conséquences psychologiques, anxiété latente, période de dépression, perte de confiance, impossibilité de voyage, etc. Alors le rapport conclut avec des recommandations importantes, dont celle d'avoir des procédures d'appel claires pour ces personnes, mais le rapport montre surtout le biais raciste ancré structurellement dans les fonctionnements de nos États. Alors aujourd'hui, je dois le dire, je suis un laïc convaincu. Je crois profondément à la séparation de la religion et de l'État. Mais je crois surtout en la capacité de l'État d'organiser le vivre ensemble de nos sociétés. Nous devons réaffirmer aujourd'hui l'égalité et l'équité comme une valeur fondamentale, et tout le rapport de M. Jalot nous le rappelle. Aujourd'hui, l'islamophobie est ignorée dans la plupart de nos pays, et ce rapport, enfin, permet d'amener des recommandations intéressantes. Et je vais prendre les quelques secondes qui me restent pour me permettre de répondre à certains des collègues de l'Assemblée, à savoir plutôt nos collègues conservateurs. Aujourd'hui, certains qui s'associent avec les fascistes en Italie, avec les fascistes en Suède, vont donner des leçons de morale à la population musulmane sur une prétendue homophobie, misogynie ou autre. Aujourd'hui, chers collègues, ce sont les militants de l'extrême droite qui, sur les réseaux sociaux, me traitent de pédale, me traitent de sale homosexuel. Ce sont vos militants, chers collègues d'extrême droite, qui m'attaquent sur les réseaux sociaux et non pas les populations musulmanes. Donc, prenez d'abord le temps de regarder chez vous ce qui se passe avant d'aller critiquer les populations musulmanes. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Now I call Mr. Rafael Husseinov, ALDE from Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, each type of phobia is a disease in itself and is undesirable. However, phobias against entire nations, races, and religions are already a social and very dangerous disease. The targets of racism, this ploy designed to create deep conflict in society, are appallingly broad. If there are approximately 1,720,000,000 Muslims in the world and they live in over 120 countries, then these numbers already clearly display the magnitude of the scale. Regardless of size, every nation has a greeting in its own language. However, all Muslims have a common greeting, which is the first word they say when they meet someone else, salam. This word means, I wish you peace. Can a belief system that first wishes peace and tranquility to get one you meet provide the base for any phobias? Indeed, that's the essence of each of the great religions, lies the desire to increase love, amity, and understanding between human beings. If something happens in real life that does not correspond to these, then it is clear that the fault lies with politics. The evil comes from the devils acting behind the scenes. If today, at the beginning of the third decade of the 21st century, the official report of the Council of Europe speaks excitedly about the constant increase in the signs of Islamophobia on the continent, and particularly about the sharp growth in recent years, in that case, these are not mere words, but confirmation of the bitter truth based on the statistics and analysis. Today, as always, this report calls for the elimination of the root cause that gave rise to anti-Islamic racism and discrimination. For the sake of the more stable and comfortable life, a more integrated society, and a more friendly coexistence in Europe, and to combat negative trend more resolutely. Frankly, I do not accept the phrase root causes. There are not root causes. On the contrary, what we constantly observe is the work of certain forces to create the illusion of the existence of prime causes. The evil behind some anti-Islamic movement that caused a serious resonance in the world, and some terrorist attacks that are committed after it and are associated with Muslims, is one and the same. It is the same brain, the same center that controls the process. Therefore, if we want our struggle to be effective, that our calls be heard and our measures successful, we must not deceive ourselves. We must choose the right goal and intensify the struggle against the cause and the causer, and not against the manifestation. Certainly, it is very important to improve the overall legislative framework in this direction. Let us protect our common home, Europe and the world, from phobias, and prior to that, from those who created phobias. Thank you.
Thank you. In a debate, I call next Mr. Tommy Shepherd from United Kingdom.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am disappointed that some colleagues on the right of the debate have approached this report in the negative and defensive manner which they have. And in particular, that they have tried to suggest that what we are discussing is somehow related to freedom of speech, or indeed an attempt to curtail a critical discussion about the role of religion in society. That is not what we are discussing. Islamophobia is the discrimination against and oppression of people, not on the basis of what they do, but on the basis of what they believe and their belief in Islam. It is real and it is wrong. And unless we identify it, resist it, confront it, and defeat it, then it will continue to be a poison in our society, meaning harm not just to the Muslim victims of the process, but also acting as a toxin which weakens our society and causes it disintegration. I also believe that it is one of the ideological factors for racist violence in our communities. Now, thankfully, in my community in east of Edinburgh, racial attacks are not as bad as they once were. But they still exist, they are still a problem, and they still need to be confronted. Last year, 2 shopkeepers were put in jail with grievous injuries after having been attacked by 13 young women and men at the end of their shift. Thankfully, those incidents are rare, but low-level harassment of Muslim families in my community is persistent and exists every day and every week. And we need to do something about it. And I think that the report is right to examine the connection between the problems on the ground and our national public discourse, in particular the role of the media, which the report mentions. I think also the way in which our national governments approach discussion of immigration and nationality policy is also very important. And I am deeply ashamed, as a member of the UK delegation, at the actions of the British government, where it should be offering compassion to refugees seeking sanctuary from persecution. It is offering them the door and giving them a one-way ticket to a country of which they have no knowledge and with which they have no connection. This report calls for proper government action and analysis, and I'm pleased to report that in Scotland, in my country, the Scottish Government is currently engaged in working out specifically such a plan and will later this year produce a report which looks at practical action to combat Islamophobia within the context of hate crime in general. But I want to finish, Madam President, by going back and saying that I think it is vital that whilst we take national government action, we focus also on the role of individuals and communities. Because 2 days after those Asian shopkeepers were put in hospital last year, we called a public meeting in the area. More than 100 people turned up, 90% of them the white neighbours of the people who were attacked. And they were appalled and resolved to do something about it and cooperated with the police to bring evidence against the perpetrators. And that is our salvation, that ordinary people will no longer put up with this horror and are prepared to act against it.
Thank you. Now I call Mr. Roberto Rampi from Italy.
Signora Presidente, il fatto che noi in questo Parlamento dobbiamo oggi discutere di comportamenti islamofobici e di razzismo verso chi professa una fede o manifesta anche fisicamente, anche con gli indumenti che indossa una credenza, un credo religioso, potremmo considerarlo un fallimento di quello che è stato il processo di unificazione europea, il processo di sviluppo dei diritti umani e lo sviluppo di questa Assemblea. E sicuramente le parole che abbiamo dovuto ascoltare da parte di qualche collega oggi in quest'Aula ci preoccupano molto, perché certi temi che avrebbero dovuto essere consolidati dopo la Seconda Guerra Mondiale, dopo le tragedie del totalitarismo che hanno utilizzato presunte teorie della razza e presunte differenze sulla base della religione per sterminare milioni di persone, avrebbero come minimo dovuto insegnare alle popolazioni europee che cosa vuol dire giudicare qualcuno sulla base del proprio credo, dei propri convincimenti, della propria origine, del modo in cui si veste. Ma questo non è. E io credo che noi abbiamo di fronte uno sforzo madornale verso le nuove generazioni. Le nostre comunità hanno la fortuna di essere multietniche e multireligiose. Crescere in un contesto multietnico, multilinguistico, multireligioso è una grande fortuna, fa bene al cervello, fa bene all'intelligenza, produce arte, produce cultura, produce innovazione, le persone sono più ricche. E invece la chiusura e l'odio impoveriscono le persone. Allora, vedete, nei confronti dell'Islam c'è innanzitutto un tema da sottolineare, e ho ascoltato qualche collega che l'ha detto in maniera molto bella. Io lo dico così: non esisterebbe la civiltà europea se non ci fossero stati i grandi filosofi arabi, islamici, che hanno portato Aristotele nel nostro mondo. Sarebbe sparito, l'avremmo perso, avremmo perso la grande cultura della Grecia antica che sta alle nostre origini, senza la traduzione e l'accompagnamento che i grandi filosofi arabi hanno portato a noi. E questo ce lo dobbiamo ricordare. Quando si dice scontro di civiltà si dice una bestialità culturale, perché noi apparteniamo a una grande civiltà comune, che innanzitutto è quella del Mediterraneo. Da italiano sento particolarmente questa appartenenza a questa civiltà Ho degli amici siciliani, la Sicilia è stata la terra in cui nel Medioevo è stata costruita una grande cultura e architettura che teneva insieme le popolazioni europee con quelle arabe e in cui la cultura araba ha trionfato. Allora, vedete, io credo che noi dobbiamo trasmettere questi valori e oggi dobbiamo essere preoccupati se una bambina e un bambino devono ancora pensare a quale religione credono, se una persona non sa dove può essere seppellita, come succede a chi ha fedi islamiche in Italia, e se una donna, indossando il velo, non deve essere fiera della propria libertà di metterlo e libertà di toglierlo, esattamente come vuole in un paese libero, in un mondo libero che accoglie tutti. Grazie.
Grazie. Now I call Mrs. Parvin Karimzada from Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, unfortunately, intolerance and discrimination against Muslims is not a new phenomenon. Moreover, in recent years, it has increased and become more widespread. One of the reasons for the spread of Islamophobia is the spread of false information against Islam and Muslims by the Western media. Sometimes public and political figures also join this campaign, and European institutions are mostly indifferent to this issue. Statements of some media representatives and authorities result in creation of stereotypes. As a result, a wrong policy regarding Muslims is formed in European countries. Contrary to the common belief that most radicalized individuals are Islamic religious fanatics, various studies show that this view is not true. The fight against radicalization must not become a fight against Islam. It's unacceptable to present Islam as a terrorist religion. Dear colleagues, terrorism and terrorists have no religion. The international community should take this challenge into account. Reviewing and evaluating the needs and ideas of Muslim communities living in Europe is very important. If we want to rebuild inclusive society, we must be against Islamophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and other religion discrimination. Azerbaijan has faced Islamophobia directly. In the liberated territories, we witnessed that the Armenians deliberately destroyed all the cultural and religious monuments in the villages and cities of Azerbaijan. Our mosques have been turned into places where pigs and cows were kept. 65 of 67 mosques located in the liberated areas had been completely destroyed by the armed forces of Armenia. Today, Azerbaijan is restoring destroyed mosques and churches located in the territories liberated from occupation. By the way, today is the second anniversary of the tragedy in which armed forces of Armenia initiated rocket strikes into Ganja, my home city, which is the second largest city of Azerbaijan. At that time, Ganja was located about 100 kilometers away from war zone. Babies, old people, and women were killed during the rocket attack. A Muslim monument and Christian church were also seriously damaged. And no one held accountable so far from this war crime in Armenia. No one wanted justice for these children, women, and elderly. Anyway, I think together we must promote true values, which are peace, tolerance, and justice. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And the last speaker in this debate will be Mrs. Hika Kempi from Finland.
Madam President, dear colleagues, thank you for our Swedish colleague who raises a very serious and sometimes silenced issue as well. Thank you, it's a lot. It's really interesting. The report underlines the role of political actors in preventing stigmatization. This is a meaningful aspect. We can learn to meet differences only by facing difference. Some people have no experience of meeting Muslims. People also still often wrongfully link Islam to extremism, such as fears of terrorism, which makes such meeting more difficult. Prejudices, generalization, and fears are born from lack of knowledge. Awareness is crucial when it comes to accepting minorities. I would like to underline the important role of education. The earlier a child can practice facing difference, the easier it becomes. The role of schools in accepting difference is in fact decisive. Finnish schools respect the principle of inclusion, meaning that children from different backgrounds and cultures are taught in the same classrooms. I support the principle of inclusion as it helps in facing difference. However, the schools should ensure not to increase the size of inclusive teaching groups too much. Only in smaller groups will the teacher have time to address the different needs of the pupils. Pluralistic religious education is important for increasing knowledge. We have been struggling to find competent teachers of Islam. However, the situation is improving. The right to learn one's religion still raises discussion, although 15,000 children are enrolled in Islam education. Dear colleagues, in Finland we have had quite a heated debate on whether or not schools should be allowed to include visits to churches or mosques. If we forget about systematic cultural and religious education, the children and young people will seek their culture from where it is most easily accessible, for example, commercial consumerism. For this reason, the schools should ensure a diverse cultural education and pluralistic religious education. I am happy that it has now been settled in an accordance with the Finnish constitution. Schools can visit places or worship as a method of teaching as well. Thank you for this report.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, now I must interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speaker list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the texts are to be submitted in typescript electronically, if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. Point of order. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You see, I don't even know how to comment this, but when one of the member of parliament from Turkey announced the narratives of bloody dictator Putin, that all your countries protected refugees from Ukraine because they have white skin, they are Christians and watch Netflix, I think that you protected all of them because all these people are suffering from Putin's regime when they killed our children and raped our women. I don't think that is a position of Turkey delegation. I think in this case, it's not a position of this report. It's very important to unite Christians and Muslim people in this case. Thank you.
Not a point of order, Mr. So, dear colleagues, it's obvious that it's not a point of order. Please do not use the possibility of point of order. Now, at the end of the debate, before the end of the debate, I would like to call the rapporteur, Mr. Mamadou Malcolm Jallow, to reply to the debate. You have 5 minutes.
Much, Madam Chair. Interesting contributions, and I thank you all for your contributions, especially those of you that believe in human rights, and that human rights applies to all, regardless of religion, regardless of background. But I also thank all the others that do not think so, because it's important to know that they exist, and it's important to know the reason why we are here today, and the importance of this report. That is to send a signal to everybody that do not believe that Muslims also have human rights, to know that this hemicycle, this assembly, believes that human rights are indivisible, and it applies to everyone, regardless of your religion, that live around the world. I have made my case as to why we are legally obliged to protect the right to freedom. I've appealed to your intellect. But, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to speak to your hearts and minds to make a moral case. Imagine for a second, you have a mother or a sister or a daughter who happens to be a Muslim, happens to wear a veil, walking down the streets, highly pregnant. In the middle of the street meets a man who looks at her and calls her a whore. She continues walking and ignores this man. This man goes again and said, "You are not welcome in this country. You need to leave. Go back to where you come from." But your daughter, your sister, your mother was born and raised in that country. She still continues walking, and then this man comes close and starts yelling and screaming, and then pushes this woman, your mother, your sister, your daughter, on the ground and start kicking her and start physically abusing her. This is a reality for many Muslims. And this case that I'm telling you is not just an imagination, it's an actual case in the middle of a European city. Many Muslim women are subjected to harassment, physical and otherwise. Their dignity is being undermined every single day. And those that have not been harassed are every day fearful when they leave their doors at home that they will be victims of this kind of harassment, victims of physical harassment, victims of physical abuse, and even death. We've seen this. Now, some of our colleagues here are saying that is an imagination. They say that is constructive criticism. When you attack people, when you attack a pregnant woman because she chooses to have a veil. Now, this might not be your sister, it might not be your mother, it might not be your daughter, but it's a human being that also has the same rights as your mother, as your sister, as your daughter. And as Martin Luther King says, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. We cannot be silent today. We need to show to all these women around Europe that happen to be Muslims that we will protect their rights, just like we do for every other person in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the International Day for the Girl Child. We all saw how Mahsa Amini was killed in Iran simply because of the lack of freedom to choose what to wear as a Muslim woman. We say that we support the Iranian woman. We stand here, we take pictures, we have the pins. But what about the women that are here in Europe that are Muslims, that are fighting for the same freedom that the women in Iran and Afghanistan are fighting for? When Muslim women are in Afghanistan or in Iran, they are forced to wear the hijab, and when they come to Europe, they are forced to take off the hijab. That's the irony. My report is about women having the choice to choose what to wear, whether they are in Afghanistan, Iran, or Sweden. That is what my report is about, the right to choose. And if we are human rights defenders, we should be able to protect that right by all means necessary. And today we have a choice and we have a chance. Let's make sure we use that chance and that choice in line with Article 9 of the Convention, which says everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private to manifest his or her religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. Article 14 goes on and says the enjoyment of the rights and freedoms set forth in this convention shall be secured without discrimination on any grounds. Ladies and gentlemen, all I'm asking you is for us to abide by these principles. And I'm hoping that we will do that tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mamadou. Does Mrs. Annika Engblom, Chairperson of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, want to speak? Yes, that's the case. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, and dear colleagues. It is our mission at the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination to draw your attention to discrimination, intolerance, and racism in Europe, in whatever form they manifest. In spite of efforts of national authorities at all levels To eradicate it, racism is still present in Europe, and it's unfortunately even on the rise, and Islamophobia is no exception. It has been over a decade since the Assembly first adopted a resolution on Islamism and Islamophobia in Europe, and the situation of the latter has not improved since then. Muslim women and men still face prejudice in the labour market, public and political life, not to mention online and offline hate speech, including in the political discourse. The rapporteur, Mamoudou Malcolm Jallow, has referred in his report to cases of prejudice and discrimination that have been recorded by civil society organizations, individual experts and equality bodies. And as a parent, no member state is entirely free from Islamophobia. So the text is timely. We need to learn more about Islamophobia. We need to understand that it is this form of discrimination and need to be addressed as such. Now, Madam President, on a more personal note, as you have already heard, that Mr. Jallow is leaving the Parliamentary Assembly since he's been appointed as committee chair in the Swedish Parliament, and therefore will no longer be able to partake in the Assembly. And I thank you, Mamoudou, for the work you've been doing in the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, which I'm honoured to share, and thank you for shedding light on various forms of discrimination in Europe. And with the permission of the rapporteur, I take the opportunity on my own behalf, since this is also my last week here and with you in the Parliament. So I would like thank you all fellow parliamentarians, the Secretariat, the staff, the interpreters. I've decided a couple of years ago to not rerun for the election this autumn. It's time to do something else, a change in life, and the time is right now. But the 5 years that I have experienced here in Pace with all of you, with all the fruitful discussions, has been, and I think you agree with me, Jallow, the most rewarding time of my life. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. As a member of this committee, I also it can be a little bit personal, Mamadou and Annika, and good luck in the future. But we have to finish the work. The Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination has presented a draft resolution, document 15616, to which one amendment has been tabled. I remind you all that speeches and amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 1 to the draft resolution, which was unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so?
Yes, Madam President, this is a fact.
Thank you. Does anyone object? If so, please raise your hand. That's not the case. No objection. I declare that Amendment 1 to the draft resolution has been agreed. So we will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15616 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution. The draft resolution as amended in document 15616 is adopted. Congratulations to the rapporteur. Okay, dear colleagues, thank you for taking part in this debate. Now we will have a short break, waiting for another committee to change places.
Can the Legal Affairs and the Rapporteur move into the front? Yaldis, you are ready? Mr. Yaldis? Yes. Sorry, can you take the picture another place? Yes, excellent. Thank you. The final item on business this afternoon is the debate on the report titled Misuse of Schengen Information System by Council of Europe Member States as a Politically Motivated Sanction. Is document 15600. Presented by Mr. Zia Altunialdis on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. In order to finish by 8:30 p.m., we must interrupt the list of speakers at about 8:15 to allow time for the reply and the vote on the draft resolution. I call Mr. Zia Altunialdis, rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 5 minutes for your reply at the end of the debate. The floor is yours. Are you ready? Yes. The floor is yours.
Dear Chair, dear colleagues, the motion for a resolution on which my report is based stresses that some persons are unjustifiably denied access to the entire Schengen area, mainly for political reasons. In my report, I have examined the current functioning of the Schengen information system and its impact on fundamental rights. Under public international law and the European Convention on Human Rights, states can, in principle, determine the terms and conditions under which non-nationals are admitted to their territory. Within the European Union, free movement in the Schengen area and the lack of controls on internal borders are compensated for by stricter controls on its external borders, and in particular, through the issuing of alerts against individuals in Schengen Information System, the SIS. Unfortunately, misuse of the SIS by some member states have erected further barriers for the enjoyment of freedom of movement as well as other fundamental rights. For this reason, I have only covered one category of persons that could be subject to alerts, that is, third country nationals who are refused entry into the Schengen area. They may be refused entry into or stay within the Schengen area because they are considered as a threat to the public policy or public security or to national security. This means that the Schengen area member states have great leeway in deciding whether and which circumstances they can introduce alerts into the SIS2. However, it should be noted that all EU member states are bound by EU law, the Convention, and the Strasbourg Court. Therefore, no member state may arbitrarily use its sovereign power to unjustly prevent people from entering its territory. All these raises a number of issues under the Convention, and in particular, the right to freedom of expression, the right to respect for private and family life, the right to freedom of movement, and the right to an effective remedy and the prohibition of discrimination. To this end, all EU member states should take all measures to ensure that the use of SIS should not set an obstacle to the achievement of a greater unity between Council of Europe member states. Dear colleagues, access to an effective remedy is particularly crucial in this context. A remedy should be available not only against the state executing the SIS alert, but also against the state which has inserted the alert in the SIS. Moreover, data protection is among fundamental individual rights. However, in practice, there might be some problems with the exercise of these rights, mainly due to the lack of information about the existence of an alert and about the available remedies. The SIS should no longer, under no circumstances, be misused in order to restrain third country nationals' access to the Schengen area on political grounds that are in violation with the Convention. In addition to the infringements to the fundamental rights of third country nationals, misuse of the Schengen system also harms the commercial relations and investment opportunities by imposing unjustified barriers to the entry of businessmen and entrepreneurs. Trade fairs and other commercial events are representatives of the business world. However, applications for Schengen visas made for such purposes might not be found convincing and might be rejected as ungrounded. Although the member states, in principle, have sovereign right in determining the conditions of entry of other citizens into their territory, they are at the same time under treaty obligations when deciding on the matter to observe basic norms of human rights and rule of law. Excessively long bureaucratic procedures, complicated application form, long queues, exaggerated conditionality on the financial situation, interrogative questioning, and unexplained visa denials curtail the cross-border movement. Dear colleagues, that is why in the draft resolution, several concrete recommendations have been made in this respect. Member states issuing alerts should follow the principles of proportionality and individual assessment. They should not restrict the right to be informed about the inclusion of an alert and should observe data protection rights. Moreover, all states should refrain from misusing SIS system as part of advancing their political agenda by entering unjustified alerts. Adequate monitoring and verification system should be put in place. Member states should also adjust their national legislations to ensure that administrative decisions on refusal to issue a Schengen visa due to political or other reasons are subject to judicial review in the relevant member states. The European Union and its member states should also adopt guidelines on minimum common standards governing SIS2 alert procedure, as well as substantive criteria for issuing SIS2 alerts. Consider establishing a mediation body which would examine the issue of whether human rights standards have been observed in relation with the use of alerts. At this point, I would also like to stress the efficient cooperation in these issues will provide lots of opportunities for all sides. Member states of the Schengen area to cooperate with Council of Europe member states which are not members of the European Union. Last but not the least, preventing misuse of the Schengen information system is not only essential to protect fundamental human rights, but also to safeguard trust among national authorities and to allow them rely on accuracy and lawfulness of the information contained in the SIS system. I believe and I hope that with the adoption of this report, we as all parties to the issue will take a very useful and big step towards strengthening the freedom of movement of individuals, establishing data security, and preventing the misuse of the Schengen system, especially for politically motivated reasons. And I thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Altunialdis. Then we continue on the speakers on behalf of political groups, and the first is Mr. Hisiar Ossioy from United Left. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me start by expressing my sincere thanks to Mr. Alton Yildiz for this important report on the misuse of the Schengen information system by member states of the Council of Europe as a politically motivated sanction. This misuse has already hurt many citizens of third country nationals, including citizens of my own country. The report is extremely detailed and overly technical, but the main argument very simple and clear. The report emphasizes that all countries have the right to make sure that their sovereign territories are protected from all kinds of threats and their citizens live in safety and peace, and that many countries may have legitimate concerns for public or national security, but such security concerns cannot be used as excuses to justify criminalization of certain people and violation of their fundamental rights. In this case, free movement of persons. Unfortunately, many Schengen states use vaguely defined notions of public or national security as a wide leeway to arbitrarily issue alerts against people of certain nationalities. This is utterly unacceptable. That is why our group will fully support this resolution. Like Mr. Rapporteur Alton Yildiz, I am also a deputy from Turkey, and I have been receiving many complaints from our citizens who are denied Schengen visas for no obvious reason. Politicians, students, lawyers, professionals, families, or just tourists. I can't go into details of specific cases due to time limits, but I am convinced that many of these denials are politically motivated forms of discrimination. Having said that, I would like to bring to your attention another important issue from my country, as it is directly related to freedom of movement. Currently, tens of thousands of Turkish citizens are not allowed to travel abroad, not because of Schengen authorities, but because the Ministry of Interior in Turkey, and not even the courts, has issued alerts about them in its database. Among the blacklisted are also members of parliament, one being a member of this very parliamentary assembly since 2018, Mr. Tayyip Temel. The chair of our delegation, Mr. Ahmet Yildiz, has kindly and sincerely tried to resolve this issue, but my understanding is that he couldn't. Even the letter from PACE president didn't help to remove the travel ban on Mr. Temel. Currently, dozens of HDP deputies and elected Kurdish mayors cannot travel abroad because they are blacklisted in the name of fighting terrorism, public order, and security. I would like to conclude by underlining a very striking similarity. Whether the Turkish Minister of Interior or authorities of a Schengen state, the logic is quite familiar. Violating freedom of movement based on vague notions of public and national security and arbitrary decisions above and beyond the law. This is authoritarianism par excellence, nothing less and nothing more. Please keep in mind that no security and order is sustainable without rights and freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soy. The next speaker on behalf of the Socialist Group is Mr. Konstantinos Efstatiou. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Η συνθήκη του Schengen αποτελεί κατάκτηση. Είναι ένας από τους πυλώνες πάνω στους οποίους χτίζεται η ευρωπαϊκή ολοκλήρωση και πιο συγκεκριμένα ο χώρος ελευθερίας, ασφάλειας και δικαιοσύνης. Χωρίς τη συνθήκη του Schengen δεν μπορούμε να μιλούμε για ελεύθερη κυκλοφορία των πολιτών μέσα στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, ούτε για ασφάλεια, ούτε για δικαιοσύνη. Ζούμε σε μια δύσκολη εποχή για την Ευρώπη. Η ρωσική εισβολή στην Ουκρανία, η παράταση του πολέμου, οι συνέπειες από αυτόν έχουν δημιουργήσει πολλά προβλήματα σε όλες τις χώρες της Ευρώπης με αντίκτυπο στους πολίτες της. Σε αυτή τη δύσκολη περίοδο αυτό το οποίο προέχει είναι η Ευρώπη να μην χάσει το ηθικό της πλεονέκτημα. Ποιο είναι το ηθικό της πλεονέκτημα? Ασφαλώς είναι η δημοκρατία, τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα, το κράτος δικαίου και σαν σοσιαλιστές θα προσθέταμε και το κοινωνικό κράτος και την κοινωνική αλληλεγγύη. Μόνο μέσω της προσήλωσης σε αυτά μπορεί η Ευρώπη να ορθοποδήσει ώστε να προχωρήσει στην ολοκλήρωσή της. Έχει αποδειχθεί στην πράξη ότι η προσήλωση και ο πλήρης σεβασμός των ανθρωπίνων δικαιωμάτων είναι πάντα δύσκολη, ειδικά σε περίοδους κρίσης. Εκεί ειδικά που υπάρχει συσσόρευση δύναμης και εξουσίας, είτε δημόσιας είτε ατομικής, οικονομικής ή πολιτικής, εκεί αναπτύσσονται οι τάσεις για κατάχρηση της. Αυτό συμβαίνει δυνητικά στην περίπτωση όπου η διακριτική ευχέρεια που παρέχει το SIS στα κράτη και στις δημόσιες αρχές μετατρέπεται πολλές φορές σε πρακτική η οποία εξυπηρετεί αλλότερους σκοπούς. Πολύ ορθά η θαυμάσια και εμπεριστατωμένη έκθεση του κ. Ζιγιάλ του Ναγιαλντής καταγράφει τους κίνδυνους κατάχρησης που υπάρχουν μέσα στη ζώνη του Schengen. Είναι γι' αυτό τον λόγο που συγχαίρω τον κ. Ναγιαλντή για τις προτάσεις του για έλεγχο και πρόληψη της κατάχρησης. Ειδικά ως προς το δικαίωμα της κατοχύρωσης του alert, γιατί σε καμιά περίπτωση δεν θα πρέπει να επιτρέψουμε την χρήση αυτής της εξουσίας προκειμένου να παραβιαστούν βασικές αρχές της δημοκρατικής κοινωνίας. Είναι ανεπίτρεπτο και ξένο στη δημοκρατική κοινωνία υπό το πρόσχημα της ασφάλειας των συνόρων ή της προστασίας της δημόσιας τάξης να απαγορεύεται η μετακίνηση μέσα στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση ατόμων, προσώπων και πολιτών μόνο και μόνο γιατί εκφράζουν την άποψή τους ή γιατί αμφισβητούν τα στερεότυπα ή διαφωνούν με την εξουσία ή προτείνουν κάτι διαφορετικό ή ασκούν αντιπολίτευση ή οραματίζονται ένα καλύτερο κόσμο. Η εξέβρεση μηχανισμού πρόληψης ή επανόρθωσης σε περιπτώσεις διαστροφής των συστημάτων του SIS θα πρέπει να μας απασχολήσει πολύ σοβαρά. Είναι καιρός να εφαρμοστεί και στην περίπτωση της συνθήκης του Schengen η λογοδοσία, η επανόρθωση και η αποκατάσταση του δικαίου. Για αυτούς τους λόγους υιοθετούμε και υποστηρίζουμε την έκθεση, όπως και το προτινόμενο ψήφισμα και συγχαίρω ακόμα μια φορά τον εισηγητή. Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Vladimir Vardanyan from EPP Group and Armenia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Every time when I addressing the issue concerning the visa regulations, I remember the famous Eric Maria remarks, Arc of Triumph, and I try to understand how it was important for Europe for this last century to pass away from the very complicated system of getting visa to travel to each other country, up to the establishment of the system where each and every EU citizen is allowed to travel inside of the European Union, as well as giving the priority, giving the right of the people of the third countries to apply once for all the member states. So Schengen system is one of the main assets of the European Union. Believe me, as a representative of the country which is use the Schengen system very often and who understand the value of Schengen visa, is quite important. It's a desire to be in a club which is called the Schengen Union or the Schengen area. For sure, being so open, European Union try to secure the issue concerning the entry to the European Union via this Schengen system. And here, for sure, we should take into account that, for sure, everybody knows that the right to give permission to get this in this or that country is totally a prerogative of a single state. But, you know, Schengen system is not just a single state visa entry. Schengen system is also a value system. When we are speaking about Schengen, we should speak about the values. And it's not just an ordinary right of the state to allow or not to allow the person to enter. For sure, it is prerogative, the sovereign prerogative of the states. But simultaneously, we shouldn't forget that all the EU member states are covered by the European Convention of Human Rights. And it's quite important that the system shouldn't be misused, especially in the cases when some political consideration may affect it, and especially discriminatory affect the right to enter to the Schengen zone. You know, the people in our region do believe that the European Union should be as democratic outside as it is inside. And the right to see their relatives or travel or the shared European values should be respected. And all the commitment of the Schengen value system should be a pillar for building a wider and better Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is on behalf of the European Conservatives, Mr. Zorin Titus Munkaciu. He's not in the plenary. Is there someone else that wants to speak on behalf of the European Conservatives? No. Then I continue to the representatives of the ALDE group and Mr. Erik Niels Kross from Estonia.
Here.
The floor is yours.
Dear Chair, dear colleagues, unfortunately, we have, the ALDE group and me personally, we have quite a bit of problems with this report. And not because we do not support the freedom of movement and not because we do not support human rights and liberal values. But let's start with the actual title of the report, of the resolution. It says, misuse of the Schengen information system by Council of Europe member states as a politically motivated sanction, as if it's a stated fact that there is misuse. Actually, if you read the report, or attached to the resolution, it doesn't establish that there is a systemic misuse of the Schengen system at all. What we read are several cases, and the report actually says alleged cases of violation, some of them highly dubious. For example, one case concerns Russian Kremlin-controlled TV channel journalists who were banned from Schengen because they were secretly recording Jehovah's Witnesses in Estonia. Now, we all know that, or at least should know, that Jehovah's Witnesses are systematically repressed and imprisoned in Russia. And the TV channel concerned is actually by now sanctioned in the European Union. So, of course, we do not dispute that the Schengen system should not be misused. The problem is that the misuse has not been established. As a personal note, I have quite a bit of experience with autocratic governments misusing well-intended systems wrongfully. For example, I was put on the Interpol red notice system by Russia, claiming that I'm involved in high-sea piracy. I'm probably also blacklisted in many countries, autocratic countries, for my previous activities. But I do not dispute the right of those countries to do that. The core problem of this report and the resolution is a dangerous association, and I heard that same phrase many times already from previous speakers, is a dangerous and actually mistaken association between the freedom of movement, which is one of the core freedoms of the European Union, indeed, and the entering of the Schengen visa space. I recall, and you should all know that the Convention expresses verbis states that freedom of movement concerns the freedom of movement inside one's borders and the freedom to leave one's country. It doesn't concern entering other countries. This association should not be made because that enables the autocratic governments to accuse the European Union and the Schengen system in violating the freedom of movement, which it doesn't by default do with the visa system. So if there is any misuse, there is a misuse, potential misuse of this report if we pass it by the autocrats, blaming Europe for violating the rights that it actually doesn't do. And therefore, on behalf of ALDE, I call upon everybody to vote against this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Kross. And then we continue on the speakers list, and the next speakers have 3 minutes. And the first is Mrs. Catarina Roja Ferreira from Portugal and representing EPP. The floor is yours.
Madam President, dear colleagues, first of all, let me remind this Assembly that the free movement of persons established by the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992 is a cornerstone of the European Union citizenship. And to this regard, the conclusion of the 2 Schengen agreements represented a key milestone. In addition, this is a domain in which the Council of Europe has been active since the early years of its existence, and it is always important to recall that this Parliamentary Assembly has approved previous work regarding this issue, namely in its resolution 1894, adopted in 2012, regarding the inadmissibility of restrictions on freedom of movement as punishment for political positions, in which it had been stressed out that freedom of movement should not be restricted as a sanction for the expression of peacefully held political opinions. So, this Assembly has a clear position about this issue since 2012, and I trust that after 10 years, the position remains the same. Besides this resolution, it is never enough to mention that the states limited themselves in their own sovereignty to determine the conditions of entry into their territory in order to comply both with international treaties on human rights protection and the rule of law. In fact, the obligation to protect requires specifically that the states protect individuals and groups against human rights abuses. So, the use of alerts in the Schengen information system should not lead to any misuse of the system. More important, the use of alerts should not infringe fundamental rights and freedoms. In reality, before entering an alert in the Schengen information system, an assessment of proportionality must be made of the alert in Schengen information system. Nevertheless, in case of misuse or violations identified, they should be immediately addressed. And Schengen member states are under a duty to genuinely provide for swift judicial review of any entry into the database. Human rights are a priority in the European integration process and must always be safeguarded. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the next speaker is on behalf of European Conservatives is Mr. Dmytro Nataluchka from Ukraine. He's not in the plenary. Then we continue from the ALDE group. It's Jacques Lenay from France.
Merci. Mes chers collègues, je souhaite tout d'abord remercier notre collègue pour son rapport qui pointe les difficultés soulevées par le système d'information Schengen. Celui-ci vise à renforcer la protection des frontières extérieures de l'espace Schengen. Il permet aux autorités compétentes d'un État membre de signaler un ressortissant d'un État tiers qui représenterait une menace pour l'ordre public, la sécurité publique ou la sûreté de l'État. Les personnes faisant l'objet d'un signalement dans le système d'information Schengen ne remplissent pas, sauf cas particulier, les conditions d'entrée sur le territoire des États membres. Le rapport qui nous est présenté aujourd'hui tend à dénoncer une utilisation abusive de ce système pour notamment prendre des sanctions à caractère politique. Si les États membres de l'espace Schengen restent libres d'accueillir sur leur territoire qui ils souhaitent, ils doivent, en tant que membres du Conseil de l'Europe, respecter le droit à la vie privée et familiale, le droit à la liberté d'expression et l'interdiction de la discrimination. Toutefois, des divergences d'appréciation peuvent exister entre États membres. Ainsi, au regard de la loi française, certaines situations dénoncées par le rapport ne paraissent pas problématiques alors que d'autres sont dénoncées à juste titre. En effet, le rapport cite le cas d'un pasteur américain connu pour ses sermons anti-LGBTI et pour avoir remis en question les preuves de l'Holocauste. Celui-ci s'est vu interdire l'accès à l'espace Schengen par les Pays-Bas, le Royaume-Uni et l'Irlande. Or, en France, l'homophobie et le négationnisme ne sont pas des opinions, mais des délits. Il n'est donc pas certain que l'attitude de la France aurait été autre. En revanche, concernant la discrimination, le rapport cite l'exemple de l'Estonie, qui a interdit à 2 journalistes de la chaîne de télévision Russia, d'ailleurs notre collègue Cross en a parlé, l'entrée dans l'espace Schengen pendant 5 ans à la suite de l'utilisation de caméras cachées pour filmer les membres de la communauté des témoins de Jéhovah à Tallinn. Les autorités ont estimé que les actions des journalistes visaient à se moquer de ce groupe religieux et constituaient une discrimination religieuse susceptible d'aboutir à une incitation à la haine. Or, pour la France, les témoins de Jéhovah sont une secte et non une religion. Il n'est pas sûr, là encore, que la France aurait adopté la même attitude. Ces exemples illustrent parfaitement les différentes conceptions de ce qui peut présenter ou non un danger pour la sécurité de l'espace Schengen. Dès lors, il est nécessaire de garantir des possibilités de recours effectifs contre les décisions des autorités administratives ou judiciaires nationales qui sont à l'origine du signalement. Nous devons être particulièrement attentifs à ce point En ce qui concerne la France, il est indiqué dans l'annexe du rapport que les autorités françaises n'ont pas répondu aux questions du rapporteur relatif au droit de recours. Je précise que celui-ci existe bien et qu'il se fait devant la Commission nationale informatique et liberté.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Halil Ostavli from Turkey. The floor is yours, sir.
Dear Chair, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to congratulate the rapporteur for his remarkable work. Preventing the misuse of the Schengen system is an extremely important subject for the protection of human rights of the third country nationals and fair functioning of the system itself. Schengen system was designated for enabling European Union citizens to move freely within the Union without being subject to border checks. This definitely constitutes a success in terms of expanding the freedom of movement for EU citizens. However, over the years, we observed that Schengen system was instrumentalized by some states in order to put further obstacles for people from non-EU countries. Regrettably, some European Union member states abused the system by arbitrarily issuing alerts on the grounds of baseless national security concerns. Such abusive practices not only infringe the rights of those third country nationals by denying their entry, but also serve as a hidden political sanction to the country concerned. However, no state may abuse its sovereignty over non-alliance entry for political leverage, and no state should be allowed to violate people's rights for its own political agenda. What makes the matter rather complicated is that while Schengen system is established at European Union level, it also grants large discretion power to each member state in determining the entry of third country nationals. Therefore, it requires resolution both at national level and EU level to safeguard the rights of third country nationals. As suggested in the report, effective national legal and administrative remedies must exist with a view to provide for such persons to bring legal action before courts. At European Union level, misuse of the system must be addressed in order to stop some member states abusing their sovereign power for their hidden political agenda. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. And the next speaker is Mr. Alexander Nikolovsky, North Macedonia, and on behalf of EPP.
Thank you very much. I would like to support the report, and I think it is coming in a very important time, especially when we are talking about the introduction of the Schengen information system and the possibilities for abuse of it. Coming from a country that was subject to visas till 2008, till 2008 we were needed visas to enter into the Schengen area, and I know how it was to wait for hours in front of an embassy to obtain visa, so you can come, for example, here, or do a political meeting, or if you want to have a vacation. And then 2008, we managed to fulfill the criteria. There was visa liberalization, which allowed to many citizens travel, go abroad, use the possibility, meet different people, different cultures, and so on. And now with the implementation of the Schengen information system, I'm afraid that on a backdoor, some of the countries of the Schengen area are trying to implement visas again, especially as a political tool, as it is written in the report. And that's why I'm supporting Article 6, where the Assembly calls on member states of the Schengen area to do certain things that are listed here. But as well, I think this system should be again reconsidered in the Schengen area, because it might cause far-lasting political consequences for the European Union. Anyhow, the credibility of the European Union is weakened out of the European Union for many reasons, starting from geopolitical reasons. We have war happening in the European continent, and there is huge propaganda against the European Union. then third country factors like is China, for example. And additionally to that, if there is additional restriction for the countries that are not members of the Schengen area, and most of them are not members of EU but are state candidates, then it's a huge political risk for the European Union. This morning in this assembly, we were discussing about the support of the European perspective for the Western Balkans. Implementing of this Schengen information system, I think, goes against the idea of support of the European perspective for the Western Balkans, for example. So there are a lot of threats and challenges, and that's why the report comes in a very, very important time and crucial time, and I hope it will be carefully studied by the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers, but as well it will be carefully studied by the members of the Schengen area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next speaker before I interrupt the speaking list is Mrs. Hilkka Kempi from Finland. The floor is yours.
Madam President and dear colleagues, as an MP of a country defending the EU's 1,300 kilometers external border, I support the description given by the notion of threat to public policy or public security or to national security in the SIS2 legal framework. However, I agree with the rapporteur that the aim of this notion is not to prevent political dissidents from entering the European Union. According to the European Convention of Human Rights, anyone entering a member state has the same human rights and freedoms that are granted within the state's jurisdiction. As the report mentioned, in Finland, entry bans are codified in section 146 of the Aliens Act. It clearly sets out the criteria for the circumstances, what an entry ban and thus an alert can come into question. Any alert decision can be appealed in the administrative court. In recent weeks, the discussion in my country on Schengen has not been on these alerts, but on the Schengen visas granted to Russian citizens. In 2015, we experienced a situation of a hybrid warfare, when what turned out to be a very organized move from Russia's side brought some 1,000 asylum seekers to our eastern border. Maintaining instantly is a power politics. We do not know what will happen next in the Russian border. Power politics has always challenged international law and the rule-based international order. As a result, our interpretation of the Schengen border rule has changed. Now we can close our border in hybrid warfare situations. However, let me point out the right to apply for asylum is not the same as using people as a means of hybrid warfare. In my view, using migration as a method of hybrid threat is unacceptable from a human rights and a national security perspective. Such extreme cases require careful consideration of human rights, democratic control and post-monitoring. Ruled by a dictator, it is of course in Russia's interest to undermine the rule-based culture of states governed by rule of law. We should not give to this. We need a rule of law benchmark of the Schengen information system to help us better interpret the Schengen regulation. This requires sharing best practices and data collecting, as well as parliamentary oversight. Thank you.
Thank you. I must now interrupt the list of speakers, and the speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. And I remind colleagues that the texts are to be submitted in typescribed electronically if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I call for Mr. Altunialdis, rapporteur, to reply to the debate. You used 9 minutes last time and ask you to manage in 4 minutes now. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Madam Chair and dear colleagues, I just would like to emphasize that we recognize that states have a sovereign right in deciding who would enter their territories. However, what we are discussing here is member states must not resort to discriminatory treatment while applying laws and regulations and deciding who are eligible to enter their territories. Let me reply to Mr. Kroes. And the resolution recognizes the right of states, as I said, to regulate entry to their territory. I just would like to ask Mr. Kroes to read paragraph 2 of the draft resolution. It says anything and everything on this subject. But under the convention, states must not discriminate in the application of the rules while they are allowed to put into place. It is only the discrimination that we are talking, which we try to stop and against, while we are proposed to set up some remedies, I mean legal remedies and practical remedies as well. My dear colleagues, as you all know, the free movement of person is one of the 4 basic freedoms of the European Union. Misuse of the Schengen system, if there is, infringe the human rights of any countries of nationals outside EU trying to enter Schengen area, in particular, the right to respect for private and family life, and the right to freedom of expression, the right to freedom of movement, and the right to effective remedy, and the right to be protected from exposing discrimination. I think we are all in this hemicycle under the duty and obligation to protect all our citizens and to keep the right of above-mentioned rights of citizens guaranteed by the Convention and hinder the nationals from discrimination again. And as I said before, there is no doubt that nationals at the third country to enter in the Schengen area is on discretion power of the related nation. But we would like to put here and as a rule and just rule-based practice and rule-based application to the nationals would like to come into the Schengen area. Let me just also underline this. Effective and timely remedy for those unlawfully prevented from entering an EU country, establishment of an ombudsman institution and strengthening cooperation among national authorities would be remarkable achievements in abolishing unlawful barriers curtailing freedom of movement. And finally, Madam Chair, I would like to thank all members of the committee and the Assembly who supported this report with their contributions and proposals for amendments as well. And of course, I would like to express my gratitude for the Secretariat of the Committee and for the Chair of Legal Affairs and Human Rights Committee, and who put enormous efforts for the preparation of this report. And I hope you all would approve and support this report. And I thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Altunialdis, rapporteur. And does Mr. Damien Cotillard, chairperson of the committee, wish to speak? You have 3 minutes, sir.
Merci Madame la Présidente, chers et chers collègues. Ce rapport est issu d'une proposition de résolution qui avait été déposée en 2018. Il a été traité par pas moins de 3 rapporteurs, Madame Sotnik d'Ukraine, Madame Madame Rukavishkova de Russie et ensuite Monsieur Altonialdis de Turquie. Une visite d'information aux institutions européennes à Bruxelles a eu lieu en février de cette année. La Commission des affaires juridiques et des droits de l'homme a adopté le rapport à l'unanimité en juin de cette année. Et nous venons de recevoir un amendement écrit, adopté également à l'unanimité lors de notre réunion d'aujourd'hui. Quant aux 2 amendements oraux qui vous ont été transmis, Madame la Présidente, ils ont aussi été adoptés à l'unanimité par la Commission. Le rapport et le projet de résolution tels que présentés aujourd'hui sont le résultat de plusieurs années de travail et d'un compromis que la Commission estime équilibré entre les différents principes et préoccupations. J'aimerais faire 3 constats. Tout d'abord, les États ont un droit souverain, le rapporteur vient de le rappeler, en vertu du droit international, à décider des personnes autorisées à entrer sur leur territoire. On parle ici évidemment du droit de la migration et non pas du droit des réfugiés. La Convention européenne et les traités du Conseil de l'Europe ne garantissent pas un droit d'entrée sur le territoire d'un État spécifique. Deuxièmement, le système d'information de Schengen laisse une grande latitude aux États membres ou participants pour décider ce qu'ils introduisent, quels signalements ils introduisent dans le système d'information de Schengen concernant des ressortissants de pays tiers. Troisièmement, enfin, des rapports ayant fait état de signalements prétendument injustifiés qui pourraient potentiellement conduire à des violations des droits issus de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, tels que le droit au respect de la vie privée et familiale, l'interdiction de la discrimination, le droit à un recours effectif ou le droit à la liberté d'expression. Il est légitime pour notre Assemblée de s'en préoccuper. Le projet de résolution ne remet évidemment pas en cause l'existence du système d'information de Schengen ou sa légitimité, ni sa manière de fonctionner. C'est en fait un instrument précieux pour la sécurité des pays de l'espace Schengen. La résolution invite simplement les États, et non pas l'Union européenne, puisqu'on sait bien qu'elle n'est pas encore membre de notre institution, les États à prendre des mesures supplémentaires pour empêcher une utilisation abusive du système, en veillant à ce que les signalements ne soient pas introduits pour des raisons politiques, ce qui serait contraire à l'esprit du système et potentiellement contraire à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. Il s'agit donc de préserver des principes chers et centraux pour notre organisation. La Commission, Madame la Présidente, vous propose à l'unanimité de soutenir ce projet de résolution tel qu'amendé. Et en son nom, j'aimerais remercier le rapporteur ainsi que le secrétariat pour le travail important qui a été effectué.
Merci, Monsieur Cottier. The debate is closed. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution in document 15600 to which 1 amendment and 2 oral amendments have been tabled. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 1 to the draft resolution, which was unanimously approved by the Committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is it so, Monsieur Cottier?
It is so, Madam President. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cottier. Does anyone object? No? No one? If so, please ask for the floor by raising your hand, but there is no one? No. As there is no objection, I declare that Amendment 1 to the draft resolution has been agreed. And then 17. And then I have received an oral amendment from Mrs. Sune Abersdotter, which reads as follows. In paragraph 6.5, after the word effective, add the words and timely, so that paragraph 6.5 reads, and I give the words, provide for persons subject to SIS2 alert, effective and timely remedies against national, administrative or judicial authorities' decisions which have been at the origin of the alert. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy and consolidation, and if there is not opposition from 10 or more members to it being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7. Is there any opposition to the amendment being debated? I see none. That is not the case. I therefore call Mrs. Sunna Abersdottir to support oral amendment, and you have 30 seconds. The silver one, you know.
Silly of me, Madam President. I should be used to this by now. It's a very simple oral amendment. It's simply meant to stress that when a measure is effective, it is also timely, and it's just important to include that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Eversdotter. Does anyone wish to speak against the oral amendment? No, not. What is the opinion of the committee on the oral amendment?
It was supported unanimously, Madam President.
It's in favor. I shall now put the oral amendment to the vote, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And the oral amendment is agreed. I have received a further oral amendment from Mrs. Sunna Abersdottir, which reads as follows. After paragraph 6.15, insert new paragraph 6.16 to read. And I say the words. Pay particular attention to alerts entered by states found in systematic breach of the rule of law by the European Commission or under the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe's monitoring procedure for the functioning of democratic institutions and the rule of law. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy or conciliation, and if there is not opposition from 10 or more members to it being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7. Is there any opposition to the amendment being debated? No, it's not seen. That's not the case. We will therefore proceed to the vote on the draft resolution. No. Yeah, that is not the case. Sorry. I therefore call Mrs. Eva Sunnarsdottir to support the oral amendment. You have 30 seconds, and it's the silver one.
Thank you, Madam President, for reminding me. So I believe that this serves both for clarity and political reconciliation in the sense that it focuses on paying special importance to states that are maybe prone to misuse this system. And I think it goes to the subject of the report and it clarifies what its meaning should be.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the oral amendment? That's not the case. What is the opinion of the committee on the oral amendment?
Madam President, the committee is unanimously in favor of this oral amendment.
Thank you. In favor. I shall now put the oral amendment to the vote, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And the oral amendment is agreed. I will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15600. A simple majority is required, and the vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And the draft resolution as amended is adopted. The Assembly will now hold its next public sitting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. with the agenda which was approved on Monday morning. The sitting is adjourned. 8:30.